You wake to the pale wash of morning light, seeping through the palm frond walls, thin enough that you can see the soft sway of leaves outside. The air is still cool, holding the memory of the night breeze, but already it carries something sharper, a warmth that does not come from the sun. It is the scent of cloves, faint but unmistakable, drifting from somewhere down the shore. You breathe it in, slow and steady, letting it settle. It is not a smell you notice every morning, but today the tide and the wind have conspired to carry it to your doorway. You step outside, and the world is soft at the edges. The sea is slow to move, its surface rippling in gentle rolls rather than breaking into white foam. Boats lie moored near the shallows, their outriggers rising like the ribs of sleeping animals. Between them, thin ropes trail into the water, tethering the day's work to the safety of the sand. To your left, the beach curves toward the trading sheds, low, open-walled huts with roofs of dried nipa. It is from there that the scent comes. Somewhere within those sheds, sacks of cloves from far-off islands rest in shadow, their fragrance seeping into the air. Cloves do not grow here in abundance, but they arrive in trade, passing from hand to hand until they reach foreign ships. Historians will tell you they once commanded prices so high that a handful could buy cloth enough for a family's year. Some even argue still about whether the cloves traded here came mostly from the Moluccas, or if smaller, overlooked groves once dotted nearer islands, their traces now gone. As you walk, the sand cool underfoot. A fisherman nods to you while repairing his net. The twine is dark with salt, and the knots pull tight under his fingers. Behind him, a small boy balances on a dugout canoe, pushing away with a bamboo pole. The water near the canoe shivers, scattering light into moving patterns on the boy's face. You pause before the sheds. Inside, bundles of dried leaves, coils of rope, and woven baskets are stacked in lazy order. The clove sacks sit to one side, their burlap rough and stained from long travel. An older woman sits beside them, slowly counting as she weighs small handfuls in a brass scale. She hums to herself, a tune with no clear beginning or end, the sort that drifts along like the tide. She glances at you briefly, then goes back to her work, the weights clicking softly as they settle. Outside the sheds, the breeze changes, carrying more of that clove sweetness toward the village. Somewhere behind you, smoke rises from a cooking fire, but its wood scent is drowned by the sharper perfume of the spice. You close your eyes and let the two smells mingle, earth and sea, smoke and clove, until they blur into something without name. The morning moves slowly here. You find yourself standing longer than you meant to, watching gulls wheel above the tide line. The sun has risen higher now, brightening the water until the boats cast shadows like ink on a page. You know that by noon the scent will fade, swallowed by the heat and the stronger smells of the cooking day. But for now, it holds the air in a kind of quiet. You walk toward the dock as the day loosens from its blue-gray edges. Water laps the pilings in small, regular breaths, and the first boatmen have already finished their rice and dried fish, wiping their palms on coarse cloth before rising to work. The wharf is narrow, made of timbers that creak softly as people pass, and everything here wakes by sound. The thud of a bundled load set down just so, the hush of straw-wrapped bark brushing against palm rope, the murmur of counting done more by habit than by voice. You move more slowly than the others do. Your task is only to watch, to breathe, to notice. That is enough. Cinnamon arrives as strips and curls, thin as a fingernail and pale as sun-bleached wood. In baskets and long-tied bundles, it looks like a stack of rolled leaves, each piece cupped into an easy curve. When a trader lifts one to show a boatman the quality, the scent rises in a warm ribbon, sweet, woody, a little peppered. It does not push. It hangs lightly, then settles in your throat. Men test by snapping a strip between their fingers and listening for a dry, clean break. They do not hurry. The day is longer than the pile in front of them. On the water, two outrigger boats tug against their moorings, their masts bare, their hulls dark, with tar and age. Beyond them floats a larger vessel, with a high stern, where a steward leans, half asleep, watching the shore with the kind of attention that drifts but never fully leaves. The harbor smells of salt, wet wood, and a seasoning that feels almost invisible until you realize it is everywhere, a faint spill of cinnamon from a frayed bundle, enough to lace the morning. A woman in a woven hat squats by a scale of brass pans. She sets a stone weight in one pan, and with her other hand lays coils of bark in the opposite pan one by one. The beam levels. She exhales and notes the count with a notch on a piece of bamboo. A boy beside her peels thin outer shavings from a stick of bark with a knife that has known many mornings. The shavings curl into tiny spirals, tight as snail shells. He taps them into a jar bound for a cookhouse up the lane. You know, because people say it, because sailors repeat it half proudly, that ships once crossed from these seas to the other side of the world carried by winds and by silver, and that along their planked bellies lay spices measured in weight and worth. In the years when galleons stitched oceans together, Manila drew threads from many directions, cloth from one horizon, metals from another, and spices from islands near and far. That is a common truth, repeated often, easy to believe the way the tide is easy to believe. It comes, it goes, it leaves a line. You do not argue with the line. Near the piles of bark, a trader gestures with two fingers, not yet, not that bundle, and the boatman shifts it aside. They talk about thickness, about color, about how once dried, a good strip keeps its curve like a small smile. Someone mentions a grove upriver where the trees are shorter and the bark runs hotter in the mouth, and someone else shakes his head, not convinced. People still argue, gently, about where this bark truly first bent its way into these markets, whether its earliest fame here rode in from distant strongholds, or whether quiet stands on nearby slopes fed trade more than the stories remember. The river keeps its own counsel, sliding past with patient shoulders of greenish water. You stand close enough to see the scars where bark has been lifted from branches. The inner surface is smooth and tawny, marked by fine lines that catch the light, like grain in worked wood. A man with steady hands splits a thicker piece into two with the tip of his knife, and the two halves flex like reeds. He sets them in the sun for a breath, then lays them with others under a mat to rest. The rhythm is modest and unbroken. Lift, test, lay down, tie. Lift, test, lay down, tie. A boatman pulls a cord tight and tucks the end neatly beneath the bundle. He chews a sliver of bark as he works, not for hunger but for the heat it lends to a quiet mouth, and he offers you one without looking up. The piece softens at the edges on your tongue, then warms, and you find the taste sits in the same part of you that keeps old songs. It is ordinary, like carrying a pebble in your pocket. Someone nearby says that on long crossings, men stick slivers under their nails to keep themselves from drowsing on watch. You picture the small heat of it, the way a trick like that would pass from one set of hands to another. More rumor than instruction, more comfort than rule. Across the wharf, a bundle is opened for inspection. Inside, the strips are almost uniform, each rolled like a sleeping insect. The trader runs his palm lightly over them, then pinches a piece and holds it to his nose. He says nothing, but the way he sets it back tells you what he thinks. Another man remarks that real cinnamon, the delicate kind from certain guarded groves, breaks with less effort and carries a cleaner finish on the tongue, while thicker bark, which some call by other names, travels better and pleases cooks who like sturdier flavors. People in many places sort these things by their own senses. What is true today will turn slightly as the tongues that speak of it change. Beyond this debate, there is another that never fully ends. Which trees, which names, which lines of trade fed this harbor most in the older days? A ledger in a convent might say one thing. A letter carried for months might say another. If you gather a circle of elders and ask, one will swear by trade coming from the south. Another will point his chin toward the east. Historians still turn these maps over like shells, arguing whether local bark moved out in quiet measure, or whether most of what perfumed these piers rode in from more famous islands under watchful monopolies. The arguments are calm but endless, like the necks of herons rising and settling all day along the shallows. An old stevedore sits with his back to a post, rubbing oil into a coil of rope. He tells a boy to keep the bark off the wet boards and to keep the wet boards away from the bark, which is the same instruction said two ways. A rooster calls from somewhere behind the warehouses. A breeze pushes through and rattles the palm fronds hung to dry in the eaves. For a moment, the smell of cinnamon lifts clean and wide, washing over crates stenciled with chalk marks and over the tanned backs of men whose shoulders gleam. The sun climbs a finger's width. The steward on the high stern calls out, and two boatmen answer without turning their heads. The first bundles are carried up a narrow plank, feet finding the same polished places they found yesterday and will find tomorrow. Every step sets a small groan into the wood, a sound that reassures rather than warns. The cargo settles into the ship's shaded belly, where sacks of rice and jars of oil already wait, and someone tucks a twist of bark into a corner, a quiet habit to keep the air from going stale. You stay until the counting slows and the scale hangs quiet, until the wharf sounds less like waking and more like the steady middle of a day. The work continues without you. Your breath still carries the trace of bark, and the back of your tongue holds a memory of heat that is not quite sweet and not quite sharp. You walk back along the timbers. The water below is greener now, flecked with bits of leaf and light. You step down to the packed earth, and the world grows softer underfoot again. The cinnamon remains behind you, but not really. It keeps a place in the air even after the bundles have gone. That is what trade does here. It leaves a taste and lets you go on with your morning. You step away from the dock toward the marketplace, following the narrow lane where sand thins into hard-packed earth. The air here feels heavier, carrying the layered scents of fish laid on woven trays, green bananas in bunches, and the warm dust that clings to your ankles. But beneath all that, there is another thread softer, rounder, that you find without looking for it. It comes from the shade where a row of mats has been spread, and baskets rest in a low crescent. These are the nutmeg sellers, and they are in no rush to greet you. The shade belongs to a roof of palm leaves propped on uneven poles, each one darkened by years of smoke drifting up from nearby cook fires. The nutmeg pods rest in broad, shallow baskets, lined with dried leaves to keep the air from stealing their scent too quickly. When split open, each pod reveals a hard seed wrapped in a lacy red covering. That covering mace is peeled away carefully and set aside for its own trade. The seeds, once freed, are smooth and brown, with a faint sheen if the light catches them right. You kneel beside a basket, letting your hand hover above the pile. The air here is thick with the nutmeg's perfume, warm, a little sweet, and almost floral in a way that makes you think of dried petals hidden in a wooden chest. The seller, a woman with hair tied in a knot low on her neck, watches you for a moment before taking a pod and splitting it with a short knife. She nudges it toward you. Inside, the seed sits like a polished stone in its bright red netting. She explains, in the slow tone of someone who has explained the same thing many times, that the mace will be dried on its own, fetching a different price and going to different hands. You nod. Everyone knows nutmeg is valuable, but there is value in the parts as well as the whole. A sailor nearby leans in to say that once, in markets far away, nutmeg was weighed alongside gold, and a man could buy a small house for a handful. That much is easy enough to believe. Records from distant ports speak of it plainly, as if it were no more surprising than the price of rice. The woman smiles at the sailor's story, but her eyes return to her baskets. She picks out a few pods and sets them in a separate pile, the way a person might set aside fruit they know will ripen well. You notice she does not hurry to cover them, even though the sun has moved enough to creep under the edge of the roof. Nutmeg seems to enjoy a little warmth before it is stored. Across the lane, a man shakes his head at another's claim that all the nutmeg here arrives from the far Moluccan Islands. He insists in a voice meant for anyone listening that smaller stands once grew in other islands, nearer, where storms sometimes drop seeds into unlikely soil. The other man laughs and says those groves, if they existed, have long since been swallowed by other crops or by the forest itself. Historians still argue over this, poring over scattered mentions in merchant ledgers and vague sketches in maps that give no real certainty. You suspect the truth lies somewhere between a blend of long journeys and small, overlooked garden. A boy passes carrying a tray of dried fish, balanced on his head, the scales flashing in the sun. The scent of the fish rides over the spice for a moment, but the nutmeg holds its place, richer and more stubborn. You imagine a storeroom in some far port where the smell has sunk into the walls, refusing to leave even after the last sack was sold. People say nutmeg was once prized not just for cooking but for medicine, charm, and even protection, a small seed strung around the neck to ward off the air of sickness. Whether it ever worked that way, you cannot say. It is enough that people believed it did. The seller's hands move slowly, checking for cracks in the shells, for seeds that have lost their gloss. She slides a good one into your palm, letting you feel the weight of it lighter than you expect. Smooth as if it has been polished by years of handling. You hold it a little longer than needed, then set it back in her basket. She covers the pile with a square of cloth, not to hide it, but to keep the air from thinning its scent. Nearby, another trader tips a shallow basket to pour a pile of mace onto a mat. The red laces dry quickly, curling into small, brittle shapes that seem too fragile to carry such a sharp aroma. The sun catches on them, making the red glow brighter than the earth around them. He says that in some kitchens, mace is worth nearly as much as the seed itself, though not everywhere agrees. You lean back against a post and watch the market turn slowly under the morning sun. Voices rise and fall like a low tide. Somewhere, a gong sounds from a nearby house, and a group of people pass carrying water jars, their bare feet whispering against the ground. The nutmeg scent remains in the air, holding its own among the smells of smoke, fish, and green fruit. It is a patient kind of presence, not loud, but unshakable. A merchant passing through pauses to buy a small pouch. He ties it tight and slips it into the folds of his sash. The seller nods and goes back to arranging her baskets. Around her, the rest of the market goes on, sacks of rice shifting on shoulders, piles of plantains leaning against one another, strands of garlic tied in loops. The nutmeg sellers do not call out to customers. They wait for the air to do their work. By the time you leave, the sun is higher and the shade has shrunk to a narrow strip. The sellers pull their baskets closer to the center, away from the edge where heat might dry the seeds too much. You carry the scent with you as you step back into the lane. It stays with you, slow and sure, like the kind of story that is told only in small pieces over many years. You leave the market behind, taking the narrow footpath that winds toward the edge of the village. The earth here is darker, kept damp by the morning's shade, and the air grows cooler as you walk beneath tall trees. Soon the path narrows further, and you find yourself moving between thick green walls where pepper vines climb. Their stems twist upward around stakes and tree trunks, curling in steady spirals until they vanish into the leaves above. Droplets of mist cling to the undersides of the leaves, holding the early light in small silver beads. You pause near one of the vines, leaning close to see the small clusters of peppercorns forming along the stem. Some are still green and tight, others beginning to darken into the richer color that signals their harvest. The air smells faintly sharp, like something halfway between fresh grass and distant smoke. A light breeze moves the vines, setting the droplets to fall in slow, uneven taps onto the earth. A farmer stands a little way off, lifting the leaves one by one to check the growth. His hands are stained a darker green from brushing the plants, and his fingernails hold the faint grit of soil. He explains that the vines here are pruned carefully, so they do not climb too high, easy to tend, easy to harvest. You watch him pinch a single peppercorn between his fingers, rolling it gently before letting it drop. He tells you that, when dried, these will shrink and harden, and their scent will change into something far stronger than what you smell now. It is well known that pepper was once traded as though it were treasure measured, guarded, and shipped across oceans with more care than some precious metals. This is not the kind of knowledge anyone disputes. The records are too many, the stories too frequent. Ships from far lands, their holds heavy with grainy black sacks, once docked in busy harbors where prices were whispered more than spoken. Yet here, among the vines, the peppercorns are still quiet, still waiting to become what they will be. A young boy walks past carrying a small basket lined with palm fiber. He stops to watch you touch the vines, then grins and plucks a green peppercorn to crush between his teeth. He makes a face at the bitter taste and spits it into the grass, laughing at himself. An older woman nearby shakes her head, not because the taste is bad, but because the boy has taken one too soon. She says pepper must be patient to be worth anything. You hear, too, a low conversation between two men further down the path. One claims that pepper vines have grown here for generations, that their roots go back farther than any ledger. The other insists that the earliest and finest stocks were brought in by traders from the far west. Their cuttings passed hand to hand until they found this soil. The truth, as so often happens, is unclear. Historians still argue over whether these vines are the children of foreign stock or the quiet descendants of something that has always been here, overlooked until trade made them valuable. The farmer you met earlier moves down the row, inspecting clusters, tying a loose vine back to its stake. He hums without thinking, a small sound to keep rhythm in the work. You follow at a distance, noting how each vine seems to lean into the next, making a living wall. Between them, small flowers hide, pale and almost invisible unless you part the leaves. You remember hearing that in some distant ports, pepper was locked away behind guarded doors, released only in measured amounts to keep its price from falling. You imagine these quiet vines under such watch, and find it strange here they grow in open air, touched by anyone passing the path, their value still months away. A bird calls from the canopy above, its voice sharp and brief, like the taste the boy had moments ago. The mist begins to lift, carrying with it the faintest thread of pepper scent. It is not strong, not yet, but it lingers in your mouth when you breathe through your teeth. Further along, the path widens into a small clearing where baskets have been left from the last harvest. They are empty now, leaning against one another, their bottoms stained a dark brown from dried pepper dust. The air here is warmer, and you can almost imagine the heat needed to dry the peppercorns laid out on mats, turned by hand, their green fading into deep black. The farmer joins you in the clearing, setting his basket down. He speaks of last year's crop, of how the winds were kind and the rains less so. He says the pepper was smaller, but the taste was strong enough to satisfy the traders. You listen without answering, letting his voice weave into the slow morning sounds. The creak of a tree in the breeze, the soft rasp of a basket shifting on the ground. When you turn to leave, the farmer picks a single cluster and offers it to you. It is still green, still raw, but you hold it anyway. The beads are smooth under your fingertips, cool from the shade. You do not eat them, not yet. Instead, you slip them into your pocket, where they sit like small stones, carrying the promise of a sharper taste in some later time. The vines remain behind you, climbing in their steady, spiral way, each one tracing a path it will not change. The mist continues to thin, and the morning feels older now. You walk back toward the village, with the faint scent of pepper still following you, as if it is content to linger without asking for notice. You follow the path where the road bends inland, skirting small gardens of taro and banana. From a distance, you notice the rhythm first. A pause under a tree, a quick fold of leaf, a pinch from a little gourd, a soft bite, and then the quiet stain blossoming at the edge of a smile. Betel is the work of unhurried hands. People sit on low stools or on their heels, baskets open on their laps, and the steps repeat themselves with the comfort of an old song. A woman under a woven hat lifts a heart-shaped leaf from a neat stack. She turns it so the glossy side faces down and brushes its surface with the back of a fingernail, as if greeting it. From a small jar, she scoops a dab of white lime, smooth as clay, and smears the thinnest veil across the leaf. The smell is faintly mineral, clean and dry. Beside the lime lies the nut-sliced areca laid in even pieces, thin as a thumbnail. She nests a sliver on the leaf, adds a few shreds of cured leaf from another packet, and folds the edges together into a tidy parcel. It disappears into her cheek with a practiced push of the tongue. Your eye drifts to her betel box brass with lean corners, its lid engraved with simple vines. Inside, small compartments keep order. Lime in one, areca in another, tobacco in a third for those who like sharper company. Some houses keep their lime in tiny shells, the spiral polished by many fingers, and you see one set on a mat, its rim white from use. A boy brings water in a coconut dipper and sets it down without being asked. He knows that after a long chew, mouths want a rinse. It is said without argument that leaves, nut, and lime passed across these islands long before distant foreigners wrote about them. Early accounts by men in stiff collars mention bio as if they had wandered into a familiar habit and did not know where it began. That is a plain fact now, repeated in many records. Betel ran with trade and kinship through shores and inlets from long ago, a thread tying harbors to hills. Still, in the quiet between chews, the elders will disagree about the old paths. Historians still argue whether the first bundles reached these villages by steady drift from the west with traders and boats, or whether local gardens had their leaves and vines long before the busiest exchanges, with only the flavors changing when new hands arrived. You sit on a low bench and watch how the day holds the habit. Travelers pause where the road thickens with shade. They open their pouches the way one might open a small story. A trader offers another a parcel, with a quick tilt of his chin. A fisherman wipes his hands on his shorts and folds his own eyes on the water. The air around them smells green and faintly sweet, with a dry edge from the lime that pricks the nose. A man with a scar on his forearm pounds areca in a small wooden mortar. The tap-tap is light, nothing like the heavy work of pounding grain. He says, in the ordinary way people say things while their hands are busy, that his grandfather showed him how to rub lime on the inside vein of the leaf for more heat, and to place the areca on the vein rather than the edge so the parcel closes clean. He adds a whisper of tobacco and folds with thumb and first finger, neat enough that he could do it in the dark. He tucks it into his cheek and works it around until his mouth settles. On the packed earth you note the marks of yesterday's chewers' small red fans where people spat, each stain shaped by the angle of the lips. Some houses set a pottery jar near the doorway for this, with a rim darkened by spit, a compromise between tidiness and habit. You see a jar like that now, half filled with water tinged a soft, cloudy red. The color is as familiar as the taste. A girl skips by and is told not to step in it. She veers without looking, the way practice becomes instinct. Stories cling to the leaf as firmly as lime does. An elder says betel keeps the mouth busy and the stomach quiet between meals. A boatman claims it steadies the hands in a stiff wind. A widow admits it gives the late hours something to do when sleep will not come. A small, odd tidbit slips through the talk. Someone once tucked a flake of sea salt into the parcel before a long walk to keep thirst away. Another swears by a grain of dry ginger when the rains come. None of these tiny additions are loud in the mouth, but people keep them for their own reasons. At the edge of the clearing, a pair of travelers trade pouches the way others trade greetings. Each tastes the other's lime, this one made from burned coral, that one from shells gathered after a storm, and nod in appreciation without praise. The heat of the lime rises slowly. Not the heat of fire, but the heat of a stone left in the sun. And you feel, even from your seat, how the body registers it with a small hum behind the ears. A young man asks whether betel stains the teeth too much to be worth it, and an aunt laughs. She says the color is part of the smile, and, besides, people have been smiling this way since the days when the first boats found these shores. You taste the leaf yourself after someone presses a parcel into your hand. The fold is warm from another palm. The nut gives a firm bitterness first, then something woody, then a steadying sweetness that seems to live above the tongue rather than on it. The lime makes itself known not as flavor but as feeling, a dry lift along the gums. Your mouth grows red, and you understand why a spittoon is never far. You lean forward and let the first stain fan out softly on the earth. It looks like a small flower. An old woman opens her betel box and shows you a tiny bronze spoon for lime, thin as a bird's leg. She says her mother used a scoop made from bamboo and that her grandmother favored a shell. The box itself bears dents from journeys along the coast, and she strokes one of them as if it were a familiar face. She does not speak of the box as wealth, she speaks of it as company. The conversation turns, as it always does when there is time, to origins and meanings. One man says chiefs once kept special pouches for guests, and that certain parcels, laced with clove or a shave of sweet bark, marked high occasions. Another says this is memory gilding the ordinary, and that people have always chewed as they worked or waited, without ceremony. Historians still debate whether the habit carried a mark of rank in earlier days, or whether that mark is mostly a later telling laid over a practice that belonged to everyone. The talk is unheated. No one needs to win. The leaf is enough. The road grows busier toward midday. Sellers wave small fans over their baskets to keep flies away. A breeze rises and pushes the smoke from a cook fire across the clearing, and the smell of fish meets the green smell of betel without quarreling. Somewhere a gong sounds the hour at a house of prayer. People fold their last parcels for the morning and tie their pouches closed with quiet knots. Before you rise, the woman in the woven hat offers you a final leaf and draws a fine line of lime across it with the little spoon. She sets a wafer of areca on top, a shred of tobacco if you like, and a sliver of fragrant leaf that she says is her own small touch. You fold it under her eye, and she nods once. A teacher pleased to see a neat corner. You tuck it into your cheek and feel your mouth warm as if a small lantern has been lit inside. When you step back onto the road, the trees lean toward one another and the shade feels deeper. You carry the taste with you, and the red and the slow lift of the lime. Beside the path, jars still wait at doorways, and beetle boxes rest on mats, lids closed, contents sure. The habit remains behind like a low drumbeat, steady but not insistent. The day goes on, and the mouth remembers. You drift down to the river, where the banks lean in softly, their roots sunk like fingers into slow green water. The tamarind trees keep an easy watch here. Their branches arc over the path and then dip, heavy with pods that hang like small brown lanterns. The leaves are fine and feathery, paired along narrow stems, and when the breeze moves through them, it sounds like 1,000 tiny brooms sweeping a floor you cannot see. You settle against a trunk rubbed smooth by many backs, and the air meets you with a hush that carries a tang, as if the morning itself has learned to purse its lips. The pods are at different moments of themselves. Some still wear a tight green that promises sharpness. Others have dried into a soft brown shell that will crack with a gentle pinch. A child wades nearby to his knees, tossing stones that plip and vanish. He glances at you, then at the branches, and you both look up the way people do when ripeness hangs above them like a thought. You reach for a pod and feel its light weight. When you press the shell, it gives with a quiet snap. Inside, the pulp glows a warm rust, wrapped around polished seeds the color of wet wood. The smell rises sour, fruity, faintly sweet, and sits at the top of your throat, as if deciding whether to enter. You taste the smallest fragment first. It wakes the mouth without scolding it, laying a citrus-like edge across the tongue and leaving behind a gentle sweetness. It is the kind of sour that does not shout. It simply invites the next breath to come a little deeper. This is why cooks who know their pots reach for it. In kitchens all across the islands, tamarind has long been the sour that steeps into soups and stews, a sour that ripens the broth instead of wrinkling it. That much is certain and often said. Tamarind has seasoned local meals for generations, finding its way into the familiar bowl with a steadiness no one bothers to question. Across the river, a woman shakes a reed tray to chase flies from small fish laid to dry. Now and then she glances toward the bank, judging whether the shade will hold. Two boys under the next tree use a stick to bump the higher branches so that the driest pods will fall into a waiting mat. Their laughter arrives in little packets, as regular as ripples. One of them shows you a trick he learned from his grandfather. If a pod refuses to open cleanly, he presses it lengthwise between thumb and finger until the shell fractures along its seam like old pottery. It is a small, satisfying sound. A man comes along with a coil of rattan on his shoulder. He pauses, plucks a handful of young leaves and rubs them over the brass buckle at his waist. He polishes with the heel of his hand until the metal shows a soft shine. He grins, pleased with the quiet magic of sour on tarnish, and moves on. People here keep such habits the way they keep lullabies, not as secrets, just as things that do not need to be announced. A grandmother nearby adds her own stray wisdom. In hungry months, she roasted the seeds and cracked them to chew, the texture firm and glossy at first, then turning to a mild paste that keeps the jaw busy while the body waits for supper. It is an odd tidbit, not everyone's taste, but it has traveled in pockets and memories long enough to be offered without embarrassment. You rest your head against the tree and feel the cool underbark through the rough skin. The river moves in long, even sentences. A heron steps like a thought across the shallows, one foot, then the other, pausing each time as if listening for instruction. On a low branch, an old basket hangs with a woven loop. Inside, a family keeps collected pods until enough have gathered for a pot at noon. The basket smells like sun and leaf and a little like smoke. Someone mentions, as people often do when the talk leans toward origins, that the tamarind tree was born first in lands far to the west. where winds carry desert heat and summer lengthens shadows to the horizon. From there, they say, it traveled with sailors, traders, and plant keepers until it stood along rivers like this one and made itself at home. That movement from old coasts to new inlets, from one set of hands to another, is the kind of fact that sits comfortably in books and in mouths alike. Few argue it. The fruit's journey is stamped in many ledgers and noted in early writings with a calm certainty that does not invite quarrel. Yet as you sit, the conversation meanders into softer ground. An elder insists his grandmother spoke of groves along this river before the busiest days of foreign trade, and that the taste in her pot did not wait for distant ships. Another elder answers that names drift, that memory knots flavors together across years, and that what one family remembers as ancient may be younger than they think. Historians still argue whether the first tamarind trees here arrived with early Austronesian paths, stopping and starting across islands like the stars of a net, or whether the trees took firm hold later during livelier exchanges when more boats cut these waters and more hands guarded grafts and seeds. The arguments are not sharp. They curl like smoke and then thin. The sour in the pot remains the same either way. A little farther downstream, a woman rinses a clay jar by rolling it in the shallows, her fingers pressed to the rim. She breaks a piece of pulp into water and stirs with a stick until the clouded sour lifts the old taste from the clay. She pours the water out in a steady line that darkens the sand and begins again. The work is nearly silent, more gesture than task. You take another pot. This time the shell flakes along the curve and peels away like a dry leaf. The pulp gives with a soft stretch. You set a seed on your tongue and roll it against your teeth before spitting it neatly into your palm. It shines as if oiled. Nearby, a boy lines up seeds on a flat stone and flicks them one by one into the water, counting the rings they make. He claims certain seeds jump higher and that he can tell by touch which ones will skip best. It is not a boast, exactly. It is a private scale he tests for his own amusement. The shade shifts. You notice the tamarind's bark, brown and fissured, holding a memory of many seasons. Ants thread their careful patrol along a seam. High up, where the leaves thicken, a pair of birds argue in quick syllables and then fall quiet. The breeze returns and the feathery leaflets fold a little, as if they are thinking. You listen to them think. A fisherman sits on his heels beside you and speaks to the air more than to you. He says the river gives fish, the tree gives sour, and the pot gives comfort. He explains how he soaks pulp in warm water for a patient hour, lifts out the seeds, and pours the concentrate into fish broth that has been waiting at an easy simmer with ginger, a pale onion, and greens from the field. He does not claim invention. He claims habit. He tastes the river and the tree at once and calls it a meal. When the sun steps higher, the pods begin to warm. Their scent swells, not louder, just wider, until even the quiet patches of shade seem to carry it. You think of how the sour has traveled from tree to basket, from basket to jar, from jar to pot, from pot to breath, and how each step leaves a little taste behind, the way the river leaves a shine on stones. You are not eager to move, and the tree is in no hurry to shed you. Before you leave, you gather the fallen shells into a small pile so that feet will not slip on them. You brush the dust from your hands and drink from the river's skin with your eyes. The tamarind stands the way it always has in your memory, not as a single fruit, not as a single meal, but as the quiet sour that underlines a day. You rise and the tree stays, its pods holding their places like beads on a line. The air keeps its tang, and your tongue keeps a trace of sweet that was hiding behind the sour all along. You turn back toward the market's quieter edge where mats lie like small islands in the shade. An elder settles there beside a shallow basket, her knees drawn up, her hands resting on the rim as if warming at a hearth. The basket holds stars neat, dry, many pointed, each one a tiny brown compass. She tilts the basket, and the stars slide with a soft whispering sound, brittle arms grazing one another. The air shifts around you, warm, sweet, a little licorice, a little wood, like the inside of a well-kept chest. You kneel and the smell seems to deepen, as if bowing brings you closer to its source. She chooses a single star and sets it on your palm. It is lighter than it looks. Each arm curves gently inward, holding a glossy seed that winks in the light. She tells you the name she learned for it from traders who spoke with a river in their voices. Others here call it a Chinese star, or simply a star that sweetens broth. People say it came along the old water roads with porcelain, silk, and tea, finding a place in Manila's crowded stores and then wandering outward in boats and baskets. That part sits firmly in memory and in papers. Merchants from the northern coasts brought goods to these islands for generations, and the harbor here gathered them like a net. You picture wooden stalls, long ledgers, and the unhurried exchange of stars for rice, cloth, and coins. The elder breaks off one arm and slides the seed free with her thumb. She asks if you will chew it. The seed is smooth at first, then releases a taste both sweet and clean, like a whisper of fennel that forgot to be sharp. You let it rest on your tongue until it softens. The shell in your hand smells deeper, warmer than the seed, closer to bark than leaf. She says that some cooks toast the whole star for a breath before dropping it into the pot, waking the scent without burning it. Others let it float as it is, to do its work quietly in a slow stew until it has nothing left to give. A pot bubbles nearby in a vendor's lean-to. The vendor lifts the lid a finger's width and the air shows you its contents. Meat turning tender, soy, dark and glossy, a hush of vinegar, a low sweetness from palm sugar, and in the corner of the pot, a star wandering in circles like a small brown boat. He does not name the dish. He does not need to. The smell tells you everything important. A passerby points and says his grandmother would slip one star into a pot for a festival and two in the season when the winds ran colder along the coast. Whether that measure came from taste or from habit, he cannot say. He only knows the rule feels right in his hands. A younger woman comes to purchase a small paper twist of stars. She says she keeps one in her trunk where she stores cloth, so the scent will discourage small, hungry visitors. An old fisherman overhears and chuckles, tapping his temple with 2 fingers as if blessing the idea. He swears he once placed a star under his cap on a rough crossing and found his stomach less stubborn than usual. He admits it might have been the wind turning fine just then. It does not trouble him which reason is true. The star is small, the sea is wide. A man can accept a bit of luck when it comes. Along the mat's edge, a debate unfolds in the low, courteous tone of people who have argued the same point for years. One man insists that the star has seasoned local broths for as long as anyone here cooked with clay and patience. Another says its regular use in daily pots is a later comfort, spreading from port towns inward along rivers and roads only after many seasons of trade. A third, with the calm of a person who likes 2 truths at once, suggests that families near the harbors took to it early, and families farther inland took their time, folding it into old recipes the way you tuck a slip of leaf into a well-known chew, not changing the habit, only widening it. Historians still argue whether such stars sat often in lowland kitchens before the busiest days of ship and ledger, or whether they became ordinary only after markets near the sea made them familiar. You count the points on the star in your hand and find that all their arguments can sit there comfortably without crowding. The elder shows you her measures. A handful is not a measure here. She counts by 8 2-pots worth for a wedding table, or by 3 for a household cure. She says that when her breath is tight and the night refuses to let go, she bruises 2 stars in a mortar and pours hot water over them, covering the cup with a saucer. She lets the steam kiss her face and sips without hurry. Whether it eases the chest or simply gives the hours something gentle to hold, she does not care. The steam smells of warmth that is not fire and sweetness that is not fruit. You note the shapes: broken stars, whole stars, stars with a point missing like a tooth, fat seeds, dry seeds, seeds that have slipped out and lie like small brown fish in the weave of the mat. She sorts as she speaks. Whole ones for the vendor who likes his goods handsome, chipped ones for cooks who only care for the pot's hush. A boy offers a coin too small and she tucks 2 halves into his paper twist, saying a broken star perfumes a small pot just as well as a perfect one if you treat it kindly. Beyond the shade, a pair of traders talk in sums and roots. They mention ports upriver where the star arrives in sacks stitched with red thread, and a warehouse along the bay where a clerk with neat handwriting keeps an exact count. Someone adds, because someone always does that long ago, great ships stitched oceans from this harbor to another across the world, and that chests of spices once lay in their bellies beside silver and letters. That broad truth no longer stirs anyone. It has been said too many times. Still, it passes through the market like a known wind, lifting papers and then settling them again. A small, odd tail surfaces as the afternoon leans forward. An aunt says she keeps one star in the pocket of her traveling coat and fingers it before stepping onto a plank between boat and shore. Not for safety, exactly, but for balance. She swears the points remind her feet to find the center. A child asks whether the star helps her walk on rain. The aunt laughs and says the star helps her wait while the rain decides what it is going to do. You think that is a good answer for many things. The elder tips the basket once more. The stars migrate from one side to the other with the sound of dry leaves stroked by a careful hand. Their scent breathes out and then rests again. A fly visits and leaves just as quickly, unimpressed by sweetness that offers no sugar. Somewhere a bell notes the hour, and a slow cloud passes over the market like a folded sail. Before you rise, the elder presses 2 stars into your palm and closes your fingers around them. She tells you to keep one hold and to break the other when the pot first begins to think about boiling. You thank her and tuck them into your sash. They sit there like light coins, marking your steps with a scent that brushes the edge of your breath. When you step back into the sun, the world seems paler by contrast. The star's warmth keeps close, and the day takes on the gentle outline of its points. Behind you, the elder returns to her quiet counting, and the basket, half full, looks satisfied with its work. You carry the taste, the smell, and the small, certain weight of a star that once traveled a very long way to sit today in an ordinary pot. You follow the narrow line of the market toward the shade of a stone-walled storehouse. Its roof is low, its doorway barely more than a cut in the wall, and the air inside meets you like a cool cloth on the forehead. Light filters through gaps in the planks high above, falling in soft beams that pick out dust motes hanging almost still. In the dimness, you hear a sound like dry rain, the faint rattle of coriander seeds rolling against one another inside clay jars. A man squats by an open jar, stirring the seeds with his fingers. They whisper and clink softly, each one no larger than the nail of your smallest finger. He cups a handful and lets them fall back into the jar, watching them scatter and settle. The scent rises slowly, warm, citrus, and a little like roasted grain. It is a smell that sits in the nose and the chest at once, neither sharp nor sweet, a quiet middle note that holds its ground. The jars themselves stand in neat rows along the wall, each one with a lid made from a flat river stone wrapped in palm cord. Some lids bear faint circles from years of opening and closing. You reach out to touch one, feeling the cool, dry surface. The man nods for you to lift it. When you do, the scent grows stronger, as if freed from its sleep. He tells you these seeds are from the last harvest and will keep their strength for many months if kept dry and cool. It is well remembered here that coriander has moved along these trade paths for centuries, finding places in broths, marinades, and pickles. Early accounts mention its presence in Manila markets, tucked among other goods in baskets or clay jars brought from upriver farms. That much is steady history. Coriander walked into the kitchens of these islands without fuss, and once it entered, it stayed. From the shadows, an older woman adds her voice. She says her father told her that long before the busiest trade years, seeds were carried in small packets in the folds of cloth, planted along garden edges where their feathery leaves could be plucked young for soups and fish dishes. She smiles without claiming this as proof. She knows others will shake their heads. And indeed, there are those who still argue whether coriander grew widely in home plots before the height of foreign exchange, or whether its steady presence in the pot is mostly the work of later trading seasons when merchants began to bring more seed from the west. Historians still turn this question over, as if by looking from another angle they might see where the first sprout truly broke the soil. Near the doorway, a boy tips a smaller jar and pours seeds into a palm leaf cone for a waiting customer. He shakes the cone gently so the seeds settle without crushing. The customer tucks it into his belt and leaves without counting coins. His payment will be in fish this afternoon. In the corner, a girl sorts seeds that have cracked during storage. setting them aside for her mother's pickle jars. She hums a tune under her breath, stopping now and then to press a seed between her fingertips and release its scent. The man at the largest jar takes a pinch and offers it to you. The seeds are firm between your teeth, then release a lemony brightness with a faint pepper edge. You taste the warm dustiness that comes after, the part that stays in the mouth like the echo of bread cooling on a board. He nods when you close your eyes to follow the flavor. He says coriander never asks to lead. It prefers to stand beside garlic, ginger, or clove, letting them speak while it holds the door open. A curious tidbit surfaces in the talk. One of the older traders remembers a time when coriander seeds were strung on thread and hung over cooking fires, not as decoration but to keep their oils warm and ready. He swears the scent was enough to season the air in a small kitchen without even touching the pot. Another laughs and says it's wasteful, but she admits she's kept a string in her pantry for the smell alone. You notice how sound behaves in the storehouse. The rattle of seeds in a wooden scoop sounds louder here than in the open air, but the voices stay soft, pressed down by the thick walls. Somewhere deeper inside, you hear the shift of another jar being opened, then the solid, padded sound of its lid returning. The light beams catch the air, showing small, slow spirals of dust moving toward the open doorway. Outside, the sun is high, and the air along the street shimmers faintly with heat. You step into the light carrying a small cone of seeds. The palm leaf is warm in your hand, and the seeds move faintly with your steps. The scent drifts upward now and then, enough to remind you they are there. Behind you, the storehouse swallows the cool air again, closing over its quiet. The jars wait in their rows, each holding the memory of green fields far from here, and of the hands that cut, tied, dried, and poured until the seeds were ready to rest in the dark. You walk on, thinking of how small each seed is, and how far they can travel without losing themselves. You take the lane that runs behind the rows of houses, where fences are low and gardens spill through them without concern. The air here feels lighter, brushed with something faintly sweet, the kind of scent you notice only when you pause long enough to let it catch you. The path opens into a patch of pale green where feathery stalks sway, each one crowned with clusters of tiny yellow flowers. This is the fennel garden, kept by a family whose fence is more suggestion than boundary. The stalks are tall enough to nod at your shoulder. You pass your hand through them, and they give way easily, springing back after your touch. The leaves are fine as thread, soft enough to cling for a moment before slipping away. When you rub them between your fingers, a scent rises aniseed with a fresh, almost minty edge. Light enough to drift, but persistent enough to return on the next breath. Near the far side, a woman bends to tie the stalks loosely with strips of banana fiber, keeping them from leaning too far under their own weight. Beside her, a basket already holds cut fennel fronds, their pale stems shining against the green. She glances at you and points toward the flowers, saying that the seeds are not yet ready, but the leaves are perfect now for the day's cooking. She lifts a stem to her face, inhales, and smiles the way people smile at something familiar and dependable. It is an old truth here, one not much questioned, that fennel came along the same trade winds that carried cinnamon, clove, and other fragrant cargo. Early records from port towns note its presence among the goods kept for European kitchens, where its seeds were favored for bread and its fronds for stews. Over time, it took root in the local soil, and cooks found their own uses for its leaves, blending them into fish dishes or steeping them in broth for a softer, brighter flavor. Still, not everyone agrees on the earliest days. One elder passing by pauses to say his grandmother swore fennel grew here before the first foreign ships, seeded in some forgotten exchange between neighboring islands. Another man shakes his head, insisting that the plant is too particular, that its first steps here must have been coaxed by merchants who already knew its worth. Historians still turn the question in their hands, uncertain whether fennel's first roots in these islands sprang from small, quiet gardens before major trade, or if its arrival belongs firmly to the age when ships' holds smelled of mingled spices. A small girl wanders between the rows, pulling at the lowest leaves until her fingers shine with their oil. She rubs them on her wrists and says the scent keeps away biting flies. Her mother laughs, but does not stop her. In another corner, a boy gathers stems for the kitchen, shaking them gently so that no soil clings to their bases. He lays them in the basket like lengths of soft rope. The woman tending the garden offers you a stalk and tells you to bite the base. The stem is crisp between your teeth, releasing a sweet, cool juice. It tastes almost like licorice, but less heavy, with a brightness that feels close to green apple. She explains that the stems can be sliced into thin crescents for pickling or eaten raw with vinegar. The seeds, once they harden and turn brown, will be dried in the sun, their scent growing deeper and more complex. A passing fisherman stops to trade a string of small fish for a bundle of fronds. He tucks them into the mouth of the largest fish, saying they will keep it sweet until he reaches home. Another neighbor joins in with a small story. When his wife was expecting their first child, she chewed fennel seeds each morning to keep her stomach calm. Whether it was the plant or the thought that eased her, he cannot say, but the habit remained. You notice the hum in the garden not from voices, but from bees moving slowly between the flower clusters. They land without hurry, walking along the small yellow blossoms as if counting them. The air feels warm here, held by the height of the plants and the closeness of the fence. The breeze that reaches you carries the scent of fennel mixed with the sharper green of nearby lemongrass. The woman begins to gather the cut fronds into a larger bundle, tying them with a knot practiced over many seasons. She says she will take them to the market later, but she will keep a handful for tonight's soup. She has no recipe to offer you, only the assurance that the taste will make the broth feel both fresh and familiar. When you leave, the path back toward the village smells faintly sweeter than before. The fennel stalk you carry bends slightly in your hand, brushing your arm as you walk. Behind you, the garden returns to its quiet sway, the bees still tracing their invisible paths, the fronds still catching the light in their fine green threads. The scent follows you just far enough to make you turn your head once before it fades. You hear it before you see it, the scrape of a knife against wood, steady and rhythmic, like someone sharpening the edge of the morning. You follow the sound to a cooking fire set in the packed earth yard of a stilted house. Smoke rises in a thin column, curling through slats in the roof, carrying with it a scent that is peppery yet bright. A woman crouches beside a low bench, working a blade along the skin of pale, knotted roots. The roots are galangal, their flesh cream-colored with a faint blush of pink, their smell sharper than ginger, less sweet, with something almost floral hidden in the heat. She holds one root up to the light, turning it so she can scrape away the last of the outer skin. The peel falls in thin curls onto a banana leaf at her feet, their edges already drying in the warmth. Her hands move without pause. Scrape, turn, scrape until the root is bare and smooth. She slices it into coins that fall with soft taps into a clay pot. Steam swirls out, carrying the root's scent into the air until it finds you where you stand. It is said in many kitchens here that galangal wakes the broth without crowding it. Its heat is polite, spreading slowly instead of striking all at once. This is no rumor. Traders from the eastern islands and the mainland brought it along with other roots centuries ago, and its place in the pot became as steady as salt. From there, it traveled further through galleon holds and spice sacks to distant kitchens where its name took on other shapes. A barefoot boy squats nearby, fanning the fire with a strip of woven palm. Sparks drift upward in lazy arcs. He says his mother uses galangal not only for cooking but to rub on her temples when a headache comes, pounding the root with a little coconut milk to make a cooling paste. Whether it cures or simply distracts, he doesn't know, but he trusts the way she closes her eyes when the smell reaches her. The woman lifts the lid of the pot and stirs. Inside, pieces of fish float beside slices of green papaya, the broth cloudy with the starch of roots and the slow dissolve of galangal's oils. She says the root must be cut across the grain so its fibers soften faster. She offers you a taste from a wooden spoon. The broth is warm and light, the galangal rising in the back of your throat and then fading into something almost lemon-like. From the doorway, an older man watches and adds his opinion in a voice softened by years of repeating it. Galangal grows best in the wet edges of the yard, near where water drips from the eaves after rain. He claims the roots from those damp corners are stronger and carry a cleaner scent. The woman laughs and says he only says that because it is his job to weed that part of the yard. There is, as always, a small disagreement about its beginnings here. One neighbor insists the plant was rooted in these soils before any ship brought it. Another says its clear cousins, ginger and turmeric, may be native, but galangal's sharper bite is a gift from traders. Historians still argue whether galangal was cultivated widely in these islands before major trade links, or whether its spread is tied closely to the bustling years when foreign buyers sought not just cloves and nutmeg, but every root that could survive the voyage. The boy tending the fire drops a few more slices into the pot, then slips one raw into his mouth, crunching it like sugar cane. He chews without wincing, used to the heat, and tells you it is good for the stomach. His little sister tries the same and immediately spits hers into the ashes, scowling. The boy grins and offers her a pinch of salt to soften the burn. A neighbor passes with a bundle of lemongrass over his shoulder and stops to chat. He tells the cook to add a stalk near the end for fragrance. She nods but does not promise. The pot is hers, and she knows what it needs. She drops the lid back into place, letting the steam push against it before escaping in short sighs. The air around the fire has taken on layers: smoke from the wood, sweetness from the papaya, and the sharp, clean thread of galangal weaving through both. The woman says that tomorrow she will slice the leftover root thin and leave it in the sun to dry. Once dried, it will last for months, ready to be dropped into another pot or steeped in hot water for a drink against the chill. You watch her scrape another root, the sound keeping its patient pace. The curls of skin on the banana leaf shift in the breeze, some lifting over the edge to join the ash in the fire. The boy has stopped fanning now that the flames are steady. He sits cross-legged, sniffing the air with a small smile. When you step away, the smell follows you for a while, fading only when the houses close in around you again. You find yourself breathing a little deeper, hoping to catch it again, and thinking of the pale coins sinking into the pot, each one releasing a taste that spreads without hurry. The path slopes gently upward toward a patch of garden where splashes of color break the green. At first you think the color comes from flowers, but as you draw closer you see thin stalks topped with blooms of deep violet and pale lilac. Beneath each flower, a small bulb swells, and inside those bulbs are the crimson threads that make saffron. The plants stand in careful rows, their narrow leaves bending like fine grass, their blossoms held just above the soil as if to protect them from the wind. A woman kneels in the dirt, her skirts folded neatly under her, and works with a stillness that feels deliberate. She plucks a flower between thumb and forefinger, tilts it toward the light, and then, with a small bamboo tool, teases out the red filaments from the center. Each thread is so thin it seems almost unreal until she lays it against her palm, where it glows like the edge of a sunset. She sets the threads on a square of woven cloth beside her, the pile so small you can see the texture of the fabric through it. She says the work must be done in the morning, before the flowers wilt in the sun. The threads lose strength quickly if left too long inside the blossom. Her voice is quiet, as if speaking too loudly might scatter them. She tells you that once dried, these threads will perfume rice, tinting it the color of gold and giving it a taste that sits somewhere between honey and hay. It is an open truth that saffron does not grow easily here. The heat is often too constant, the soil not always kind to it. Yet in certain higher, cooler places, small plots like this one have been tended for generations. Traders once carried threads into the islands from far-off ports where saffron was weighed like coins. Over time, a few determined hands learned to coax it from their own earth, though not enough to feed more than local kitchens and small markets. From the far side of the plot, an older man calls across the rows, saying his mother's mother claimed these flowers were once planted only for feasts and for the tables of those who could afford the patience they require. Another woman answers that her family used to steep a single thread in warm milk for a sick child, believing it would bring strength. Neither argues the other's memory, but there is a quiet pause before they return to their work. Historians still argue whether these delicate plots have a truly old root here, or whether they are younger, seeded by a mix of ambition and curiosity after traders showed the way. A child sits at the edge of the garden, turning a blossom in her fingers without picking it apart. She says the flowers smell like the air just before rain. She offers it to you, and when you lean in, the scent is faint, not the strength of the dried spice, but something cleaner, green at its edges. The woman working nearest to you picks 3 flowers in quick succession, her hands sure and light. She places the threads from each into a small clay bowl. At the bottom, they look like thin shavings of garnet. She says drying them takes only a short while, but their fragrance will last for years if kept sealed and away from light. She remembers her grandmother keeping them in a blue glass jar hidden in a wooden chest. A passing neighbor stops to watch, saying he once worked on a ship where saffron was kept in waxed cloth to survive the long months at sea. He recalls how the scent would escape when the bundle was opened, filling the narrow cabin in moments. It made the crew restless, as if it belonged to some feast they would never see. A small, unusual tidbit surfaces when another picker mentions that the leftover yellow stamens often discarded can be steeped in water to wash linens, leaving them with a pale gold tint. She admits the color fades quickly, but the act feels like keeping a little of the flower's luxury for everyday life. You crouch beside the cloth where the threads are gathering. There are perhaps enough here to pinch between two fingers, yet the work has taken hours. The patience seems woven into the air itself, which moves slowly between the rows, stirring the leaves but never bending the blossoms. The woman offers you a single dried thread from last year's harvest. It is brittle to the touch, breaking with the lightest pressure. On your tongue it does not taste sweet at first, more earthy, like dry grass, but when you breathe out, the flavor blooms into something richer. You understand why even a few threads in a pot can change the entire dish. When you rise to leave, the pickers remain in their careful line, working through the last of the open blossoms. The cloths holding the morning's harvest are folded gently over, their contents hidden from the sun. The path down from the plot smells faintly of the flowers, though you know the air will lose it before you reach the village. You carry the thread the woman gave you in the crease of your palm, as if it might slip away in the lightest wind. Behind you, the rows of violet and lilac bend toward one another, and the garden keeps its quiet work. You step away from the hills and follow the smell of smoke and sun-warmed earth toward the open stretch behind the drying sheds. Here, mats woven from split bamboo are spread in neat rows, each one covered edge to edge with pale slices of ginger. They catch the light like coins, their thin edges curling slightly as they dry. The air is thick with their scent, sharp, lemony, and almost sweet in the back of your throat. It is the kind of smell that makes you breathe a little deeper without thinking. A man crouches beside the nearest mat, turning slices with the flat of his palm so both sides meet the sun. His hands are quick but gentle, lifting and laying without bruising the flesh. He says the roots were dug just after dawn, while the earth was still cool, and scrubbed clean in the river before slicing. Beside him, a wide basket holds more slices waiting to be spread. A thin haze of dust and steam rises where the sun pulls the last of the water from the ginger. Ginger's place in the island's cooking is not in dispute. It is as certain as the presence of salt or fire in broths, stews, teas, and the small remedies passed between families. Merchants from far coasts once carried it out in baskets and jars, but its cultivation here runs so deep in the soil that it no longer feels like something brought. It feels like something that simply is. Still, a neighbor passing by says her grandfather claimed the finest ginger, the kind that kept its heat even after months at sea came first from other shores, brought by traders long before his time. Another neighbor shakes his head, saying the root was already here in the oldest stories, tucked into the diets of fishers and farmers before the loud years of foreign exchange. Historians still turn the matter over, unsure whether the first stalks in these islands were gifts from early travelers or the quiet descendants of a plant always at home in this soil. The man on the mat offers you a slice. It is warm from the sun and stiff at the edges, the scent blooming as you bring it closer. You bite it in half. The flavor strikes sharp at first, then settles into a citrusy warmth that fills the mouth without burning. He nods in approval, as if you have passed a test you did not know you were taking. At the far end of the drying yard, a woman kneels to tie fresh stalks of ginger in bundles. The green tops are left on, curling in the heat. She says the tops are often cut away, but some cooks like to bruise them and throw them into boiling water for a quick broth. In another corner, two boys lay out new mats, brushing away stray leaves so the slices will dry evenly. An odd tidbit surfaces from the woman. In her mother's kitchen, ginger peel was never discarded outright. It was dried separately, then burned as incense to keep mosquitoes away during the rainy season. She says the smell is bitter but oddly pleasant when it curls through the rafters. You notice how the mats shimmer faintly in the heat. The slices nearest the edge dry faster, curling more, while those in the center still glisten. Now and then, someone walks between the rows to shoo away birds looking for an easy meal. The ground under the mat smells of bamboo and sun, layered with the heavier perfume of the root. A trader arrives carrying a clay jar lined with palm leaves. He buys a small pile of the driest slices, tipping them in until the jar is nearly full. He says they will be pounded into powder for a spice blend, mixed with salt and a little dried fish. The man at the mat says nothing, just lifts another slice and turns it, exposing its damp side to the sun. The day moves slowly here. Shadows of the mats fall at sharp angles, and the heat grows steady without becoming oppressive. The air tastes faintly of ginger with every breath, even when you turn away from the rows. Somewhere behind the sheds, a kettle whistles, and you know without looking that someone is steeping the fresh root for tea. You take another slice from the edge of the mat before you leave. This one is thinner, more brittle, breaking clean in your mouth. The warmth it leaves behind is softer, fading slowly until it is no more than a memory at the back of the tongue. You carry it with you as you step into the open path, the drying yard's hum of quiet work already beginning to fade behind you. You turn into a lane that cools itself with shadow. Palm fronds lean over like careful hands, their stiff fingers lacing a roof of green against the sun. Beneath this shade, low racks of split bamboo hold mounds of sliced roots, the color of deep morning yolk. The air here is quieter than in the drying yard you left, and the scent is softer, too earthy, warm, a little bitter at the edge. Turmeric prefers this kind of light, not the hard glare that steals color, but the filtered day that lets it keep its gold. A woman kneels by the nearest rack with a fan woven from nipa strips. She brushes its breeze across the slices so that heat moves without burning. Each piece is thin and ovoid, stained at the center with a darker ring. When she lifts one and snaps it, the break shows clean and bright, and a dusting of yellow clings to her fingers. She wipes her hand on a cloth already marked with many such days, the stains layered like remembered sunsets. Turmeric's place in these islands is old enough to feel ordinary. In kitchens along the coasts and in the uplands, it has colored broths, rice, and fish for generations, giving them a warmth that the eye notices even before the tongue does. Early accounts from travelers and clerks mention yellowed stews and rice tinted by a root of the ginger kind, and local names for the plant appear in lists of garden crops kept for household use. That much is steady ground. The root belongs both to the pot and to the yard. You crouch and the shade deepens. A boy sorts the slices by feel, pushing the driest toward one end of the rack, the damp toward the center. He tells you the racks sit under palm for a reason. Full sun bleaches the color and steals the smell. His mother taught him to listen for dryness. The edges whisper when they are nearly ready. The middle goes quiet when it is done. He demonstrates, rubbing two pieces together until they make a faint, papery rasp. Beyond the racks, a clay jar sits half in shadow. The woman taps a little powder into her palm, newly ground from last season's harvest. She lifts it to your nose. The smell rises blunt and warm, with a hint of damp wood and something like dry hay after rain. She says a pinch will do in the pot, 2 if the fish is strong, and none at all if the dish is already proud with annatto. You nod, knowing that kitchens here keep a calm balance between colors too much yellow, and the eye stops listening. Not far off, an old man sits with the leg stretched out, his ankle tied with a cloth painted gold. He explains, cheerful in his discomfort, that he twisted it in a muddy field. His wife ground turmeric with a little palm oil and warmed the paste over embers before binding it on. Whether the paste heals or simply tells the ache that someone is paying attention, he cannot say. He only knows the ankle feels accompanied. A neighbor adds that her mother would smear a thin line of the paste along a baby's foot to teach the step to find the ground. She smiles at the memory and at the way such sayings hold even when no one requires proof. The woman with the fan turns a slice and speaks of the galleon years, when sacks of spices rode in dark holds and yellow powders stained the seams of their wrappings. She says merchants liked turmeric because it traveled well, refusing to sour and asking only for dryness. She heard from her grandmother that some buyers in far ports prized it as much for cloth as for cooking. Dipped thread took the color easily, and festival sashes could be made bright again with a quick bath. That strand of memory rests beside written lines in a ledger or 2 notes of dyestuffs packed alongside pepper and clove. The match is easy enough to believe. Still, the first root's path into these yards is not a single line. One elder insists the plant grew wild along certain slopes where the soil stays damp, gathered long before crowded markets and long voyages drew maps across the water. Another claims the best clumps were brought and traded from neighboring islands, their buds divided and tucked into garden corners until every household had a stand of its own. Historians still argue whether wide household cultivation here is as ancient as the stories suggest, or whether it thickened mostly during later trade, when gardeners began to keep more of what ships desired. The roots do not answer. They spread quietly by rhizome, taking whatever explanation the soil offers. A child arrives, carrying a shallow bowl of rice cakes waiting for steam. An older aunt pinches a little turmeric into a bowl of coconut milk and swirls it with a finger until the white turns daylight gold. With the tip of her nail, she paints simple curls on the cakes, sunhooks, fishtails, the letter shapes of no alphabet, only luck. It is a frivolous habit, she admits, but it pleases the eyes at a feast and leaves a ghost of warmth on the tongue. An odd tidbit follows on her breath. Once, during a season of flies, she rubbed a line of turmeric along the doorway sill and swore the pests hesitated there as if reading. No one believes her entirely, but no one tells her to stop. The racks click as the bamboo settles. A breeze crawls through the palm leaves, and the shadows move like slow fish over the yellow. The boy hums a tune he learned from boatmen, words worn down until only the rhythm remains. You notice a small mortar set on a flat stone. In it lie the knuckles of last year's roots, ground into a coarse meal for dyeing fishing lines. The woman explains that a quick soak gives the twine a color that is easy to find in morning light when nets are mended on the beach. Whether it strengthens the fiber or simply makes the eye kinder to it, she does not insist. The practice endures because it is useful to someone's hands. A pair of traders pass by and pause to feel the dryness of a handful. They talk without lowering their voices about price, weight, and the ship that waits with a hold that smells of oil and canvas. One says that when the root is pounded with ginger and dried fish, it makes a seasoning that keeps a fisherman honest about his rice, a little on top, and the bowl tastes like it had more to begin with. The other laughs and says a seasoning that encourages patience is worth more than its measure. You look more closely at the cut faces of the slices. Their color gathers toward the center in rings that pulse outward, tighter at one edge than the other, like the map of a slow fire. A few flecks of earth still cling where the knife missed a crease. You flick them away and your fingertip comes back yellow. It will stay that way until evening. Stains are a kind of record, and this one writes itself on skin without apology. As the day warms, the woman shifts the racks a little deeper under the palm roof. She says the root must dry gently, or its taste turns dull. She spares a handful from the racks and slips them into a cloth pouch for a neighbor who prefers to grind his own. She keeps back a few coins of the freshest root for her pot fish, greens, a trickle of sour from yesterday's tamarind. The menu is not newsworthy. It is what the day expects. When you rise to go, she presses a pinch of powder into a folded leaf and tucks it into your palm. For color, she says, as if color were a kind of comfort you might forget to claim. You thank her, and the dust leaves a thumbprint on your wrist, like the memory of a sunlit hour. You step out from under the palms, and the light opens its hand over you. The yellow stays near, clinging to your skin and to the soft hairs on the back of your arm. Behind you, the racks rest in their tempered shade. The fan moves in its slow arc, and the fronds whisper approval. The path ahead looks a little warmer than it did before, as if some of the root's patience has bled into the day. At the bend where the road meets the harbor path, you hear the rise and fall of voices, not sharp, but insistent, the way people sound when they are repeating an old argument for the 100th time. You follow the sound and find a shaded awning beside a spice merchant's stall. Two men sit on low stools, a shallow basket of round dark berries between them. The berries are firm and dry, their surface faintly rough, their color somewhere between brown and black with a hint of rust in the cracks. This is allspice, though the name means little here. In some tongues it is called Jamaica pepper, in others simply pimiento. The merchant picks up a berry, and rolls it between his palms. He says it carries the warmth of clove, the sweetness of cinnamon, and the bite of pepper, 3 flavors in one seed. The other man nods, but adds that none of those flavors are truly as strong as the originals, which is why some cooks think of it as a friendly understudy rather than a lead actor. They both laugh softly, not at the plant, but at themselves for caring enough to discuss its place in the kitchen as if it were a guest at a feast. In the baskets behind them, you see more berries, some still bound in loose sacks of coarse weave. The scent rises as the sun warms them, a mingling of spice and wood, faintly resinous, with a sweetness that lingers after the sharpness fades. The merchant crushes one under his thumb and offers it to you. The aroma opens in a rush clove first, then cinnamon, then a distant echo of pepper. It is easy to believe the stories that claim distant traders once prized it for its ability to stand in for several spices at once, saving space in a ship's hold. It is certain that these berries come from far across the sea. There is no doubt in the ledgers or the mouths of sailors. They were carried here in small amounts, folded into the broader cargo of pepper, nutmeg, and clove. But how early they reached local kitchens is another matter. One man insists they were already in use in the busiest ports during the first galleon years, passed quietly into the hands of cooks who liked to experiment. Another says they remained rare until much later, when trade widened and more ships risked the crossing. Historians still argue whether allspice made its mark here during the height of transoceanic trade, or whether it only became common when foreign merchants left behind larger stores in Manila and Cebu. A younger vendor from the next stall leans in and offers a tidbit of his own. His grandmother used to tuck a single berry into the corner of her rice jar, saying it kept weevils away. Whether it truly worked or not, she never stopped doing it, and he still finds the scent comforting when he opens the jar. The older men nod, not committing to belief but unwilling to dismiss it outright. The merchant tips a handful of berries into a shallow pan and passes it over a low flame, shaking it so the heat touches each one. He says the toasting wakes their oils, makes the scent travel further through the broth. He warns not to crush them too fine, or the flavor escapes too quickly. He speaks the way people do when they have learned the same lesson enough times to carry it without thinking. On the far side of the stall, a boy is threading a length of string through the berries, making a garland. He says it is for his mother's cupboard, to keep the air inside smelling sharp and warm. He offers to make one for you, and you watch as he pierces each berry with a needle, the skin yielding just enough to let the point through. The line of them looks like a string of tiny beads, their color deepening where the sun strikes them. A sailor joins the circle, holding a mug of warm toddy. He says that on cold nights at sea, a few berries crushed into the drink help keep the damp from settling in the bones. Whether that is true or simply the work of the heat and the rum, he does not say. Another man remarks that in some far-off ports, bakers use the berries in sweets and breads, and he wonders aloud if they might suit the rice cakes sold just down the street. The conversation turns again to their origins, how they first crossed the oceans, who first carried them here, and which ships kept them in their holds. The men speak as if they are retelling a story everyone knows but no one entirely agrees on. The merchant shrugs at the end, saying the berries don't care. They've outlived the arguments. They will be here long after today's buyers have gone home. The air under the awning grows richer with the scent of the toasted berries. Someone buys a small paper twist of them, tucking it into a pocket with the care one might give to a charm. The basket in front of you looks no emptier than before. The berries seem to settle back into place, patient in their quiet wait. Before you leave, the boy with the garland holds it up for you to smell. The warmth clings to it, the scent deep enough to follow you into the street. You thank him, and he grins as if you have taken more than you paid for. The awning flutters in a breeze from the harbor, and the smell of salt mingles with the spice until the two are hard to tell apart. You step away, still carrying the faint taste of clove, cinnamon, and pepper braided together in a single seed. Behind you, the argument begins again in softer voices, as if it can never truly be finished. The market narrows into a bright lane, where the sun spills freely, striking baskets lined with a red so vivid it seems to glow. In each basket lie tiny, angular seeds annatto, the kind that stain anything they touch. They are rough under the fingers, their color somewhere between brick and flame. A vendor in a wide straw hat sits cross-legged beside them, idly turning a seed between thumb and forefinger. His hands bear the faint orange shadow that comes from long days of handling them. When you step closer, the color sharpens in the light. He picks up a handful and lets them fall back in a slow, rattling stream. The seeds release a scent that is earthy and faintly peppery, not strong enough to fill the air but deep enough to hold your attention when you lean in. He explains that the seeds are used less for taste than for the color. They give a red-gold tint that makes rice and stews look richer, oils warmer, and sauces seem to have simmered longer than they have. Annatto is no stranger to these islands. Its shrubs grow in lowland gardens, their pods splitting open to reveal seeds nestled in soft pulp. It has colored food here for generations, long before foreign merchants added it to their ledgers. The use is straightforward. Soak the seeds in warm water or oil until the color runs, then remove them before cooking. But even this simple practice carries its share of variations, each cook insisting their method draws out the truest hue. An elderly woman selling fish from the next stall leans over to share a memory. When she was a child, her mother would rub annatto pulp directly on her palms before pounding rice for a feast, so the grains would take on a warm blush as they passed through her hands. She admits the color faded in cooking, but the gesture pleased the guests, who believed the rice had been prepared with special care. A younger vendor offers a different story, one from her uncle, who swore annatto paste smeared on wooden bowls helped keep insects from chewing the grain. Whether this was true or simply a trick to keep people from borrowing bowls, she doesn't say. She only shrugs, as if the truth is less important than the telling. The vendor in the straw hat dips a ladle into a small pot beside him. Inside, seeds steep in oil, the liquid shimmering with red. He tips a little onto a scrap of banana leaf and hands it to you. The oil slides between your fingers like warm silk, staining the skin with a deep orange that refuses to wash away immediately. He smiles, saying the mark will stay until the next day, maybe longer. It is not a stain so much as a reminder. Nearby, two men are discussing whether annatto came to these islands with the earliest Austronesian migrations, or whether its use became widespread only when larger-scale farming began during the height of regional trade. One insists the plant's presence in inland villages proves it is ancient here. The other counters that plants travel easily with people, and that its path is hard to trace through stories alone. Historians still argue whether annatto was already common in the islands before recorded trade, or whether it spread quickly once merchants began to carry it between ports along with rice and salt. The vendor pulls a pod from a basket under his seat and splits it with his thumbnail. The inside is lined with red, the seeds tucked in like beads in a shell. He offers it to you. The pulp clings to your fingers, and when you rub it away, the stain deepens rather than fades. He says that in some households, this pulp is mixed with coconut oil to make a skin dye for dances and celebrations, the color holding through hours of movement and heat. Children run past, one holding a bamboo stick with a few seeds rattling inside. He calls it his rainmaker and shakes it until the seeds bounce against the hollow walls with a sound like dry rain. A woman nearby laughs and says the seeds can be ground into powder for paint, a trick used by children to color kites and festival masks. It is an odd tidbit, but it feels true enough. Color has always belonged to more than the pot. The lane is warm, and the sunlight turns the seeds in the baskets into small embers. People pass without hurrying, glancing down to see the color and then moving on, perhaps already picturing it in their cooking. The vendor keeps turning the seeds, not counting them, just letting them shift against his palm like a handful of minutes he's in no rush to spend. Before you go, he pours a small measure into a folded piece of paper, creasing it neatly so none will spill. He presses it into your hand, and the faint warmth of the seeds passes through the paper to your skin. You tuck it into your sash, feeling as though you carry a little light. The lane beyond smells faintly of the sea, but you still catch a trace of the earthiness behind you. The baskets remain, steady in their color, waiting for the next hand to take a bit of fire home. The sun is leaning toward afternoon when you turn into a narrow alley between two rows of wooden houses. The air here is cooler, shaded by the close eaves, and it carries a faint, sweet, spicy fragrance that seems to wander rather than arrive. You follow it past a laundry line heavy with drying cloth until you see a woman crouched by an open basket. She is holding a small pouch stitched from coarse cotton, no bigger than her fist, and she runs her fingers over it like someone greeting an old friend. She unties the cord, and at once the air sharpens cardamom. The pods inside are pale green and ribbed, each one a sealed chamber hiding dark aromatic seeds. She tips a few into her palm and lets you see them. The smell is both cool and warm at once. Citrus layered over something like pine resin, with a shadow of sweetness underneath. She says this pouch is not for cooking, at least not yet. It is her wandering pouch, carried in her sash on long journeys so the scent can follow her. Cardamom is not grown here in great quantity. The plant prefers shaded slopes and moist soil, the kind found more readily in lands to the west. These pods, she explains, came from a trader who had stopped in the port 2 weeks past. It is no secret that cardamom has moved along sea routes for centuries, from spice gardens in South Asia to the kitchens and storerooms of distant islands. Early galleon records listed alongside clove, cinnamon, and nutmeg, often in smaller amounts, enough for a wealthy household, not enough to flood a market. A boy watching from the doorway asks whether cardamom was ever planted here long ago. The woman shrugs. Some say yes, that small groves once grew in upland gardens, kept alive for a generation or two before fading. Others say no, that the plant was never truly at home in this soil, and that every pod used here was brought from elsewhere. Historians still argue whether local cultivation ever truly took root, or whether cardamom remained a guest that never unpacked its bags. She cracks a pod between her fingers and tips the seeds into your palm. They are small, black-brown, and slightly sticky. She tells you to chew just one. The flavor blooms quickly, sharp, floral, with a coolness that moves up into your nose. It feels like it clears a path through the air before fading into a soft sweetness. She says sailors used to chew them on long crossings to keep the mouth fresh, and that her grandfather swore they kept away the drowsiness of midday watch. Whether this is true or just an old boast, she leaves for you to decide. In her basket you notice other small pouches, each tied with a different colored thread. She explains that one is for the kitchen, one for trade, and one, the smallest, for keeping in her pillow at night. She says the scent in sleep makes her dreams calmer, though she cannot say why. This, she admits with a laugh, is just her own superstition. An odd tidbit comes from a neighbor who has wandered over. He claims that in the rainy season, his grandmother would float a pod in a cup of hot water and sip it slowly to invite the sun back. He admits the sun never came faster, but the cup was warm in his hands, and that was enough. The woman begins measuring pods into a palm leaf packet for a waiting customer. She counts them without looking, her fingers sure in their work. The packet is folded tight, then bound with a strip of raffia, neat enough to survive a journey by boat. She says the pods must be kept whole until the moment they are needed. Once ground, their strength escapes quickly. She stores her own in a clay jar lined with paper, hidden away from light and heat. You notice a thin trail of seeds on the floorboards near the basket, as if the scent has been marking its own path. A child stoops to gather them, pressing each into the split bamboo of the wall as if planting them there. The woman lets him, knowing they will dry and vanish without growing, but pleased by his quiet persistence. Before you leave, she unties her own wandering pouch and shakes 2 pods into your hand. She says to keep one unbroken, to be carried until its scent fades on its own, and to crush the other into the first pot of rice you cook when you are far from home. You tuck them carefully into your sash. The scent rises with your steps, threading through the smells of wood smoke and salt, until it feels as though the alley itself has remembered something. Behind you, the woman reties her pouch, slips it into her sash, and bends again over her basket. The pods wait, patient in their pale armor, ready to travel further still. Word count, 1,085. The path widens where it meets the river again, and the light opens across a tangle of long, blade-like leaves rising from the mud. Their edges arch like green ribbons, and their bases disappear into the water. The smell here is different, grassy, with a sweetness that deepens as you move closer. This is pandan, and the leaves sway slightly even though the air is still, as if they are nodding to the slow push of the current. A man in a rolled-up sarong stands ankle-deep in the water, cutting the outer leaves with a small curved knife. He bunches them into neat coils, tying each with a strip from the youngest leaves. He lifts one to his nose before laying it on the bank, the gesture almost like a bow. The scent is subtle now, but he says it will grow stronger once the leaves are bruised or knotted. He tells you pandan is a patient flavor. It doesn't shout from the pot. It lingers quietly in the steam. Wrap rice in it, and the grain will take its perfume. Boil it in coconut milk, and the sweetness will deepen without turning heavy. This is common knowledge here, as certain as the way the tide turns, but he says it anyway, the way people repeat things that feel worth hearing again. In his basket, you see fresh-cut coils stacked like green springs. He says some will go to the kitchen, others to the small shrine upriver. His grandmother taught him to knot the leaves before placing them there, the scent curling upward with the smoke of candles. Whether the knots were meant for the spirits or simply to keep the leaves from blowing away, he cannot say. A woman on the bank is rinsing a bundle in the river. She dips it slowly, then lifts it to let the water run down the length of each leaf. She says that during the hotter months, she soaks pandan in a clay jar of drinking water, letting the scent cool the mouth even before the water touches it. An odd tidbit slips into the conversation. One neighbor swears that a strip of pandan tucked into a basket of cloves keeps cockroaches away. She admits it might be the scent, or it might just be the neatness of the folds, but she does it anyway. It is known and recorded that pandan grows naturally in these islands, its long leaves edging rivers, ponds, and ditches. Traders may have carried different varieties here from other shores, but no one doubts it has been part of the landscape for longer than the oldest kitchens can remember. The uncertainty lies instead in how its use spread. Some say its presence in sweets and rice came early, passed from riverside gardens to inland markets by hand and habit. Others say it only became common in cooking when trade began to mix it with other imported spices in festival dishes. Historians still turn that question over, not for lack of stories, but because the stories overlap until they blur. The man cutting leaves offers you one. He folds it into a flat knot and tells you to keep it in your pocket. As you walk, the warmth of your body will coax the scent free. You try it, and after a few steps you begin to notice it faint, like the ghost of a cake cooling in another room. By the time the man finishes his work, the bank is lined with green coils. He carries them in 2 loads, one balanced on his shoulder, the other cradled in the crook of his arm. The leaves shine where the water has dried from them, their veins fine and straight. He says he will keep the freshest for the pot tonight and dry the rest in the shade, for use when the river runs high and the leaves are harder to reach. Before you leave, you bend to the water and catch the reflection of the leaves against the sky. They look like lines drawn in green ink across a pale page. The scent from the knot in your pocket rises again as you straighten, a soft thread winding through the river air. Behind you, the leaves keep swaying, even though nothing moves but the slow push of the current. You follow the riverbank until the houses thin and the path opens into a quiet yard. On a low table rests a shallow basket lined with palm leaves, and in it lies something that looks like a tangle of delicate red lace. The pieces are dry, but still hold their shape, each strand twisting around itself in patterns that seem too neat to have grown by accident. This is mace, the lacy covering that once wrapped a nutmeg seed. An older man sits nearby, gently breaking apart the larger pieces, so they will dry evenly. He lifts one toward the light and turns it between his fingers, showing you how its edges curl inward, like the tips of a fern. The color is deeper in some places, a red that has faded toward amber, while in others it still glows bright. He says the best mace is taken while the seed is fresh, before the lacy net loses its softness. The scent is familiar yet different from nutmeg lighter, with a touch of citrus and less of the heavy sweetness. He crushes a fragment between his thumb and forefinger, and the smell blooms quickly, bright enough to catch in your nose before settling into warmth. He says it seasons the same dishes as nutmeg, but with a finer hand, slipping in where a heavier spice might overwhelm. Mace travels alongside nutmeg in every trade account, the two bound together from the start. In the old ledgers, they are often noted separately, the mace fetching a higher price by weight. Merchants prized its lighter scent for sweets, sauces, and pickling brines. That much is agreed on. The spice reached these shores in the same sacks and ships that brought nutmeg, though not always in equal amounts. The man pauses to recall something his grandmother once said, that her own mother kept mace in a small pouch with her betel nut, not to chew but to perfume it. Whether that was a widespread habit or just one woman's indulgence, he cannot say. Another neighbor, listening from the shade, shakes her head and insists mace was used only in the pot. Historians still argue whether such offhand uses were common here before larger-scale trade, or whether they crept in later when the spice was plentiful enough to leave the kitchen without guilt. A girl sits cross-legged by the table, sorting the smaller strands into a clay bowl. She says her job is to pick out the pieces that have gone too dark. Those will be ground for curry paste. The brighter pieces are kept whole for special dishes. She lifts one to her nose and smiles, saying it smells like her aunt's wedding feast. The man reaches for another basket nearby, this one filled with nutmeg seeds still wrapped in their fresh mace. He peels the net away with care, starting at the stem end and working around until it comes free in one piece. The seed drops into a separate bowl, leaving the lace in his palm. He lays it gently on the drying mat, where the sun slips through the slats of the roof in thin gold stripes. An odd tidbit comes from a fisherman who has wandered over to watch. He claims that once, in a bad storm at sea, he chewed a strip of mace to keep himself from feeling sick. Whether it was the spice or the distraction of chewing, he doesn't know. But the taste has reminded him of calmer waters ever since. In the corner, another worker turns the drying pieces so they do not curl too much on one side. She says the dried mace will keep for months in a sealed jar, though she prefers to wrap it in banana leaf and store it in a basket with other spices so their scents mingle. She believes they protect one another from losing strength, as if spices keep watch over each other. You take a fragment from the table and roll it between your fingers. It feels brittle but not fragile, like a dried leaf that still remembers being green. When you hold it to your lips, the smell grows sharper, and you can almost taste it without chewing. Before you leave, the man offers you a small folded packet containing 3 bright pieces. He says to drop one into the pot early, let it travel through the whole dish, and to save the others for when you want to remember a day with no hurry in it. You tuck the packet away, careful not to crush it. As you step back into the path, the scent clings to your fingertips. Behind you, the lacework of mace catches the last of the morning light, each piece lying in its own shadow on the mat, drying just slowly enough to keep its shape. The road narrows again, bordered by low walls of woven bamboo. Beyond them, a patch of green rises in neat bundles, the stalks tall and straight, their bases pale as bone, and their tops feathered with grassy leaves. You smell them before you reach the edge of the plot lemongrass, its scent like lemon wrapped in warm hay. The air above the field carries both brightness and a faint sweetness, the kind that feels as though it could clear a heavy head. A woman in a wide conical hat moves between the rows, bending to cut the stalks close to the ground. She works with a small knife, slicing cleanly before tying the stalks into bundles with strips torn from the outer leaves. She lays each bundle on its side, tapping it lightly against her palm to shake loose any clinging soil. The sound is soft, almost hollow. She tells you lemongrass belongs in many pots here: fish soups, chicken stews, rice steamed in banana leaf. Its job is to lift the whole dish, she says, to make it feel lighter, even when it is heavy with meat or starch. This is a fact no one disputes. The scent rising from her cut bundles is enough to confirm it. The smell alone could season a broth before the knife even touches it. Yet she also admits there are different ways it came into kitchens. Some say lemongrass has always grown along the wetter paths here, bending in the wind beside rice paddies. Others claim it arrived with early trade from neighboring islands, its flavor carried in the pockets of merchants who already knew its worth. Historians still debate whether it is as ancient here as the stories suggest, or whether it was an adopted neighbor that quickly made itself at home. She pauses to strip away the tough outer layers from a stalk, revealing the tender, pale core. She snaps a piece in two and hands it to you. The scent bursts free, sharper now, almost like citrus, but with a green depth that lingers at the back of the nose. She says to bruise it before adding it to the pot, to let the oils seep into the broth. Some cooks tie the stalks into knots so they can be lifted out before serving. Others chop them fine and leave them in, soft enough to chew after long cooking. Nearby, a boy is stacking bundles into a shallow basket. He says his father burns the leftover leaves in the late afternoon to chase away flies and mosquitoes. The smoke carries the scent across the yard, mixing with wood fire. It is a trick passed down from his grandmother, though he admits it is as much for the comfort of the smell as for the effect. An odd tidbit comes from the woman's neighbor, who joins in to say that a poultice of lemongrass leaves, pounded and warmed, can be tied to the temples to ease a headache. Whether it works by medicine or by the simple comfort of the scent, she cannot say, but she keeps a bundle hanging from the rafters just in case. In the corner of the plot, freshly cut stalks are stacked on a mat to dry slightly before being packed. The pale ends face the same way, lined up as if for inspection. Their leaves whisper against each other when the breeze passes, a faint rustling that makes the bundles seem alive. The woman finishes tying the last bundle and sets it with the others. She says she will sell half in the market today and keep the rest for her own cooking. Tonight, there will be fish simmered with lemongrass and ginger, the broth ladled over rice still steaming from the pot. She says this without flourish, as if the day could end no other way. Before you leave, she offers you a bundle, smaller than the rest. You slip it under your arm, and the scent follows you down the path, threading itself into the air you breathe. Behind you, she goes back to her work, bending and straightening in the rhythm of someone who knows the field's needs better than her own. The lemongrass stands in its neat rows, each stalk catching the sun in its own pale blade. The market square grows busier as you return, but at the far edge, beyond the stalls of dried fish and woven mats, a quieter gathering has formed. Under the shade of a wide acacia, several men sit in a half circle around a low table. Before them are shallow wooden trays filled with cloves, small, dark brown buds, each one tipped with a four-pointed crown. The scent is unmistakable even from a distance. Sharp, sweet, and a little medicinal, strong enough to mark the air long before you reach them. A man with a narrow face and calloused hands sits at the table's center. Before him is a brass scale with two hanging pans, a weight in one and a measured pile of cloves in the other. He leans forward, counting softly under his breath as he adjusts the pile with his fingertips. When the beam balances, he nods, tips the cloves into a jar, and ties it closed with a strip of cloth. The motion is smooth, repeated enough times to feel like a kind of tide. It is a well-settled fact here, and in many old records, that cloves were once among the most valuable spices to pass through these islands. Ships carried them from the Moluccas through ports like this one, on their way to distant cities where a handful could fetch a small fortune. That history is repeated in ledgers, in travelers' notes, and in the stories of elders whose parents traded or weighed them by the jar. Yet even with this certainty, there are murmurs of doubt about the small details. One man says a few clove trees once grew on certain high ridges here, their flowers gathered for local trade before the great ships came. Another shakes his head, claiming all true cloves came from the southern islands, under the watch of strict monopolies. Historians still argue whether these local trees were anything more than curiosities, or if they ever played a role in the larger trade. A boy sits cross-legged beside the table, sorting through a tray to pick out any stems or broken buds. Now and then, he lifts a perfect clove to his nose before dropping it into the pile. The smell clings to his fingertips. He says that after an hour of this work, even plain water tastes faintly of spice. One of the men produces a small bottle of pale amber liquid clove oil and tilts it so the light shines through. He says a few drops can soothe a toothache or scent a whole room. The oil is made by pressing or distilling the buds, and its strength is enough to stain the air for days. A neighbor leans over to mention that her grandmother once dabbed it on her wrists before going to a wedding, the scent sharp enough to stand out among flowers. An odd tidbit comes from an older man in the circle. In his youth, he carried 2 cloves in his pocket during long days of fishing. He would chew them slowly when the wind turned cold, claiming the heat kept his jaw loose. Whether it was the spice or the chewing itself, he never decided, but the habit stayed with him until his teeth grew too few to make it pleasant. The counting continues in the background, the scrape of buds across the tray, the creak of the scales beam, the soft thump of a jar being sealed. A breeze stirs the acacia leaves, and for a moment the shade shifts, sending a patch of sunlight across the table. The cloves in the light look almost copper, their tips gleaming faintly. A customer arrives, leaning on a cane, and requests just enough for a single cooking pot. The merchant measures without hurry, then adds one extra bud before tying the packet. The customer nods in thanks, as if the extra is a shared joke. The scent lingers after he walks away, trailing behind him like a thin ribbon. Before you go, the merchant offers you a clove from the tray. You hold it between your fingers, feeling its small weight, its hard, ridged body. When you lift it to your nose, the sharp sweetness blooms so fully you taste it at the back of your throat. You slip it into your sash. The smell follows you as you step back into the sunlit part of the square, faint but steady, like a note held long after the song has ended. Beyond the acacia's shade, you follow a narrow side street until the houses give way to a cluster of sheds. The air grows warmer here, touched by a slow, even heat that smells of spice and wood smoke. Under one shed, long strips of cinnamon bark rest on bamboo racks, each one curled slightly at the edges like the lip of a smile. Beside the racks, a low clay kiln glows faintly, its fire hidden but steady. A man sits cross-legged on a mat, sorting the strips into bundles. He runs his fingers along the inner surface of each, checking for smoothness. The bark is pale where it has dried more recently, darker and glossier where the heat has finished its work. As he ties the bundles with thin rattan, he explains that the kiln is not for cooking the bark, only for drying it slowly so the flavor stays inside. The smell here is warmer than the cinnamon you tasted on the wharf that morning, richer, thicker, with a faint smokiness from the coals. It is easy to believe this scent could follow a bundle across oceans, surviving months in a ship's hold without losing its sweetness. The man says traders have long prized cinnamon for its resilience as much as for its taste. Records from the busiest trade years note it as a constant presence, often stored beside pepper and clove in the same hold. Still, he admits there is some doubt about the earliest trees that fed these sheds. Some insist they came from far-off groves, brought as cuttings by merchants who guarded their origins. Others claim that smaller, local stands once grew in the uplands, harvested quietly for local use long before the ships made it common in markets. Historians still argue whether the cinnamon that traveled far began its life here or only passed through on its way elsewhere. A young helper squats by the kiln, turning the strips so they dry evenly. He says the heat must be gentle too much, and the bark will curl too tightly and crack. He lifts one from the rack, holds it up for you to see the fine grain of the inner surface, then bends it slightly. It flexes without breaking, a sign it is ready to be bundled. From a small shelf near the back, the man takes a jar filled with shorter pieces. He says these are for steeping in tea or for flavoring syrup. He offers you a piece, and when you bite the end, the bark gives easily, releasing a sweet, woody heat that lingers along the tongue. The taste feels round, without the bitterness that sometimes rides in younger bark. An odd tidbit comes from a woman passing by with a basket of laundry. She says her grandmother used to place a stick of cinnamon in the water for washing linens, claiming it kept the cloth smelling fresh even after weeks in a chest. The woman laughs as she says it, but she adds that she still does it herself when she remembers. The man finishes tying a bundle and sets it aside. The rattan binding is neat and tight, the loops evenly spaced. He says bundles like these are easier to stack in the storage jars lined up against the far wall. The jars are made of thick clay, their lids sealed with wax to keep out moisture. He lifts one lid, and the air inside is heavy, with the scent darker and more concentrated than the open racks. In the corner, a small pile of bark shavings gathers where someone has trimmed the edges. These will be swept into a basket for use in making spiced vinegar, the kind sold in small bottles at the market. The helper says a few drops of this vinegar in a broth can make it taste as if it has been cooking much longer than it has. The kiln's fire pops once, sending a brief puff of fragrant smoke into the rafters. The man glances over but does not move. The fire has its own slow rhythm, one he trusts. You notice the faint red glow of embers under the ash, steady as a heartbeat. Before you leave, he hands you a short stick from the jar of steeping pieces. He tells you to keep it in your pocket until you find a cup of hot water. When the steam touches it, the scent will rise again. You slip it into your sash, its warmth faint against your side. As you step back into the sunlight, the smell of cinnamon clings to you, softer now but still present, a quiet reminder of the heat inside the shed. From the cinnamon shed, The road bends toward the docks again, and you find yourself drawn by the low, rhythmic groan of a ship shifting against its ropes. The tide is coming in, lifting the hulls until the planks creak like tired joints. At the far berth, a vessel sits heavy in the water, its deck cluttered with coiled ropes, open barrels, and burlap sacks stacked in neat rows. The smell in the air sharpens as you approach black pepper, its dry bite cutting through the salt and tar. Two men are at work near the gangplank, shifting sacks from the dock to the deck. The sacks bulge and slump as they're lifted, each one leaving behind a faint scatter of peppercorns on the wood. The men move without speaking much, their hands sure on the rough fabric. You step close enough to hear the dull rattle inside each sack when it's set down. One of them gestures toward the open hatch, where more sacks lie in the dim belly of the ship. He says Pepper has traveled these routes longer than he's been alive, and longer than his father before him. The records agree Pepper was among the earliest spices to make the long sea journey here in quantity, feeding markets both near and far. It's a steady trade, as dependable as the wind, though not without its small shifts and seasons. Still, the man adds, there's talk among some elders that certain coastal plots once grew enough pepper to season their own markets, perhaps even enough for small-scale trade inland. Others doubt this, saying the local vines were always too few to matter against the flood that came from the great pepper ports farther west. Historians still argue whether any significant share of the pepper on ships like this was born in these islands, or if all of it came from beyond the horizon. A sailor leans over the rail, a single peppercorn between his teeth. He says it keeps him awake on long night watches, the slow heat building at the back of his tongue. Below, a boy sweeping the deck tells you that when a sack splits, the crew scatters the loose peppercorns in corners to keep insects away. He doesn't know if it works, but he likes the way it smells in the dark hold. An odd tidbit comes from a woman watching the loading. She claims her grandmother strung peppercorns into small necklaces for infants, believing the smell kept away certain fevers. She laughs as she admits she's never tried it herself, but says she still keeps a pouch of pepper in her chest of winter clothes. The air on the dock is thick with mingled scents, the pepper's sharpness, the ship's tar, the faint sweetness of drying fish from a nearby stall. One of the men hoists a sack onto his shoulder, the fabric darkening where it rubs against his sweat. He walks it up the gangplank, the boards creaking under the weight. Another follows, and soon the sacks are stacked like a wall inside the hatch. A sailor hands you a handful of loose peppercorns from a torn sack. They are hard and light, their surface rough under your fingers. When you crush one between your teeth, the flavor bursts first bitter, then hot, then settling into a dry warmth that seems to cling to your tongue. The heat doesn't shout, it walks in slowly and stays. As the last sacks are loaded, the captain calls out a few words you don't catch, and the men begin to coil the ropes. The ship shifts again in the rising tide, its shadow lengthening over the water. The pepper smell drifts with the breeze, mingling with the faint metallic tang of the sea. Before you step away, you slip a few of the loose peppercorns into your sash. Their scent is faint compared to the sacks, but enough to carry the dock with you as you walk. Behind you, the ship rocks gently in its berth, the pepper sealed away in the dark hold, ready for a journey that may take months before it finds another port. The lane narrows and cools as it slips behind the market, the noise falling away like a tide, leaving wet sand behind. You pass a doorway cut low into a thick wall and step inside. The storeroom breathes a stillness that smells of wood, salt, and something sweeter. Your eyes settle slowly. Light comes through a single high window, laying a pale rectangle on the floor. Along one side, bundles of cloth rest on cedar planks, their ends bound with silk cords. Along the other, shallow baskets hold star anise, the brown, many-pointed pods arranged like careful constellations. Spice and fabric share the room without argument. You pause near the cloth first. The bundles are wrapped in paper, stamped with brush marks that look like reeds bending in wind. When you touch the outer layer, it answers with a soft rasp. The merchant who keeps this place says the bolts traveled by sea from northern coasts, where weavers have long practiced their craft, then crossed short waters to arrive here with porcelain, tea, and lacquer. This mingling of wares is no secret. For generations, ships have carried such goods into Manila's storerooms, and old accounts list them side by side with pepper and clove. That is the quiet, steady fact that even skeptical men accept. Silk and spice met often in rooms like this. Across from the cloth, the star anise waits in low baskets lined with palm leaf. You kneel and lift one whole star. It is light in your palm, 8 pointed with a glossy seed held in each arm. The scent, when you bring it close, is sweet and cool, like licorice that has learned to be polite. It is less heavy than clove, more curious than cinnamon, and it seems to settle at the bridge of your nose before slipping deeper. The merchant says the stars travel well if kept dry, and that they like the company of cloth. The cedar and the spice keep moth and damp at a distance. From the doorway, a porter enters with quiet feet, carrying a bolt of pale cloth across his shoulders. He sets it down near the cedar planks and half bows without looking up, the habit of many deliveries. The merchant unties the silk cord and peels back a corner so you can see the sheen moonlight caught and woven flat. He smiles, then covers it again and turns to the baskets. He says a single star will scent a chest of garments for weeks if left wrapped among the folds. Whether the cloth takes the spice or the spice takes the cloth, he cannot decide. But he likes the way they make each other behave. You listen to the room, the faint tick of wood settling, a far gull, then silence again. Your breath slows to match the storeroom's pulse. The merchant lifts a basket and weighs it in his hands. He says the stars came in with last month's boats, along the same path as the bolts. Old ledgers, he says, record this twin arrival fragrant cargo from southern gardens and finished cloth from the north, as if the sea had decided they belonged on the same line of ink. That the city gathered both is a thing written many times over, a mainstream truth as ordinary as the tide. Still, he admits, people argue about the first days, as they always do. Some say these stars were already in local cooking before the busiest years of foreign exchange, slipped into broths by families who lived near the earliest foreign quarters. Others insist they remained a port taste for a long time, pleasant but rare inland until sellers began to bring them upriver with cloth and tea. Historians still argue whether star anise found deep, daily roots here early, or if it spread widely only after many seasons of ship and ledger braided kitchens together. He shrugs, setting the question back on the shelf beside the baskets. The room does not care which answer wins. A woman steps in from the light carrying a small jar. She moves to the baskets and, with 2 fingers, chooses 3 whole stars to drop inside. She says they are for her chest of festival wraps, to keep the moths at bay, and to give the cloth a breath of sweetness when opened. An odd tidbit rides in after her words. She adds that when her boy had a stubborn cough, she tied 1 star in a strip of cloth and hung it by his bed. She does not claim the cough left any faster. She only says the room smelled kinder. You reach for a second basket. The stars here are a shade darker, their points less sharp, their seeds slightly wrinkled. The merchant says these will go to a shop where the cook sells spiced vinegar. He will toast the stars with a little garlic, then drop them whole into jars and let the days do the rest. He shows you a bottle near the wall. Inside, points float like brown flowers, each exhaling its small, persistent breath into the liquid. At the far end of the room, the porter returns to retie the cloth bundles. He loops the silk cord twice and knots it the way a sailor knots a line, quick and sure. He says a length of star thread once fell into a pot of dye and tinted the liquor a shade warmer, though no one could say whether the star changed the cloth or simply gave the dyer an excuse to smile at his luck. The story has no lesson. It lingers anyway, like scent in folded fabric. You ask to see the ledger. The merchant draws it from a shelf and opens to a page where neat columns walk down the paper. There, in a tight hand, sit the measures for cloth and the counts for stars, bolts and baskets, weight and width. In the margin, a small note marks a season when storms delayed the boats and the stars arrived faint. The merchant tapped oil from Clove to revive a few baskets, then let the cedar work on the rest. He points at the note with a fingertip that smells faintly of anise and wood. He tells you not to persuade you, only to share the thought that rooms like this stitch the world together more quietly than decks and docks ever did. Here, where no one hurries, cloth listens to spice and spice listens back. And by the time the door opens again, Each has learned a little of the other. It is not a grand claim. It is the sort of small truth that makes sense in a cool room. You lift one star to your lips and breathe through it. The scent narrows, then widens. You imagine it riding inside a chest of garments across a short sea, opening in another room like this, entering another set of folds. You imagine hands pulling a bolt free, shaking it once so dust lifts and falls, then pausing to ask where the sweetness came from. The answer is here, quiet and brown and 8-pointed. Before you leave, the merchant wraps 2 stars in a scrap of paper trimmed from the end of a bolt. He ties the packet with a thread pulled from another bundle, thin as hair. He tells you to keep one in your pocket and to slip the other into a jar of rice at home, not for flavor, only for company. He says rice likes to know it lives near spice. You believe him for no better reason than the way the room smells. You step back into the lane, blinking in the larger light. The packet warms in your palm. Behind you, the storeroom closes its door, and spice and silk return to keeping each other awake. The air outside tastes dull for a breath. Then the star anise finds you again, and the cloth, though you carry none, seems to rustle in your memory, as if asking to be unfolded. You follow a side lane where the houses lean close, their eaves nearly touching above. The light narrows to a pale ribbon, and the air cools as if poured from a jar. Halfway down, a doorway opens onto a courtyard no larger than a fishing net spread on the ground. In its center stands a low table worn smooth by years of palms. On the table, small glass bottles, clear and brown, some stoppered with cork, others with folded palm leaf tied down by fiber. Within them, amber clove oil holds the light the way tea holds warmth. A woman sits behind the table, sleeves rolled to the elbow, the skin of her hands polished by work. She lifts one bottle to the sunstruck strip overhead, turning it until the liquid shows the faintest green at the edges. Her nose touches the cork. She smiles, the way a person smiles at a familiar tune heard through a wall. She places it in a wooden tray with 6 others, each bottle pressed into its own circle. She says the oil comes from the same buds you saw weighed beneath the acacia, sometimes from leaves and stems as well, steamed or pressed until their strength runs out as a perfume. That much is common truth, and inked in old ledgers. Clove oil traveled with the bud trade, a companion to the dried flowers, purchased by apothecaries and households along the same routes. In galleon days it rode in small lots because a little filled a long line of needs. On a stool near the door, a boy polishes empties with a twist of cloth. He tests corks by pushing them in and lifting the bottle by the stopper alone. If it holds, he grins and sets the pair aside. The courtyard smells medicinal and sweet, sharp enough to sit in the sinuses, pleasant enough to pull you closer rather than drive you back. A customer enters with a palm to her jaw, asking for a bottle for a tooth that thinks too much. The seller pours a finger into a thimble-sized vial and shows her how to press a cloth into it, then dab the gum. The woman tries it there and then, eyes closing, breath leaving like rope uncoiled. She says the pain doesn't vanish, but it steps into another room for a while. This is the sort of everyday use many remember, without reaching for argument. Clove oil as a small mercy in the mouth, a steadier breath in a room where a child coughs, a drop on a cloth to freshen trunks and sleeves. Still, even around such certainty, talk reaches for firsts. A neighbor claims oil was distilled locally in small stills earlier than most admit, pointing to memories of copper kettles in upland towns. Another insists true strength came only from larger works across the sea, and that local bottles were mostly refills from imported casks. Historians still argue whether commercial-scale distillation took firm root here before the busiest trade seasons, or whether households mainly decanted oil brought by ship. The debate is patient and undecided, like steam pacing at a lid. The seller sets out the tools of her work, a squat tin still blackened by careful fires, a coil of copper pipe running through a jar of cool water, and a shallow basin stained the color of old tea. She does not run it today. She has enough bottled from yesterday's effort. But she explains the rhythm anyway, how the scent climbs the pipe, how the first drops carry a force that her grandmother called the spear, and how later drops soften into the shawl. She keeps both, but she blends them with a steady hand, so no one must choose between sharpness and comfort. A small, odd tidbit drifts in as a cousin wanders through. When her son was an infant too fussy for sleep, she would warm a bowl of water, add a single drop of clove oil, and set it beneath the cot. The steam carried a whisper of spice that, she swears, taught the night to be reasonable. Maybe it was the warmth, maybe the smell, maybe the hour finally giving up the fight. She does not care which answer is correct. On a shelf, paper labels lie weighted by a stone. The seller writes with a fine brush, "Oil of clove, 2 drops for tooth, 1 for cloth, none for eyes." The last caution is in a heavier hand. She tells you people will put anything where hurt calls them, and eyes do a lot of calling. A shopper reads the label out loud, as if tasting it, and nods, tucking a bottle into her sash as though it might spill if treated too casually. Another tray holds bottles meant for kitchens rather than mouths. For the pot, the seller says, though she warns that a drop will carry across a stew the way a raised eyebrow carries across a room. She tells a story about a feast where a heavy hand with the oil made a whole table taste like a chest of drawers, polished, handsome, and not exactly dinner. Everyone laughs because the oil on the air makes the joke kinder. Past the table, in shadow, a jar keeps the spent leaves and stems. These will be dried and burned at day's end, sending a thin ribbon of smoke up through the eaves. She says the smoke does less than the oil, but more than nothing, which is often enough in a yard where the dusk is busy with wings. A caravan man ducks under the lintel, smelling of rope and dust. He asks if the price has shifted with the wind. "Not today," she says. He buys 4 bottles to tuck among sacks of cloth and rice for the trip inland. He swears the oil keeps weevils respectful and persuades cloth to forget the river. He knows this is half belief, half habit. Belief and habit are the longest roads the oil travels, and no ledger marks them fully. A ledger does rest under the table, though, its edges soft with handling. She opens it for you. Columns of dates, tallies of buds weighed for yesterday's run, notes of heat and hours, sketches of a flame's mood when rain swelled the air. Here and there, in the margin, small debates are trapped in ink, whether leaf-heavy distillations keep better through a humid month, whether corks from certain trees leak less, whether brown glass forgets light better than clear. None of the notes pretend to be final. They are just handholds for another day. The boy with the cloth has finished his pile. He taps each bottle's base against the table, a light check for hairline cracks. A dull ring sends one to the reject basket to become a funnel later. He pockets a cork with a tiny flaw and shows you the trick his uncle taught him. Shave one side, dip the cut in wax, then turn the fault into a seal. The courtyard rewards such small economies. The work smells rich but pays like any other patient craft. Someone brings in a tray of cups and a kettle sighing with heat. The seller splashes the smallest drop of oil into the steaming water and holds the kettle's mouth open as she pours. The room inhales together. She sets a cup in front of you. The first breath you take over it is not taste, but posture your shoulders ease. The air inside your head widens, and the courtyard's rope of light brightens without a change in the sky. You sip. The world does not turn, but it sands its edges. Even here, under the gentle empire of cloves, uncertainty lingers like a polite guest. A man standing near the doorway says his father claimed the first bottles in this quarter were sold by sailors, bored with shore and eager for coin, decanting ship's oil into borrowed glass. Another woman says she saw an old still in a convent shed and thinks the sisters made their own for years. Historians still argue whether the neighborhood's first true workshop lay behind a warehouse by the pier or up the slope behind the fish market, and whether the earliest bottles bore painted labels or only memory for a mark. The courtyard listens and declines to decide. When the cups are empty, the seller presses a tiny vial into your hand. "For the road," she says, "a drop for the mouth, a breath for the room, a ribbon for the chest." She means chest as in trunk and chest as in ribs. The oil serves both without asking which you meant. You tuck the vial into your sash. It sits there like a quiet assurance that the day will know what to do next. As you step back into the lane, the light widens and the market's murmur returns. Yet the courtyard follows you for a while, glass ringing softly against wood, corks tested, the ledger's careful columns, the steady patience of a woman who measures steam. The vial warms at your hip, and the air you breathe feels arranged, as if someone tidied it when you weren't looking. The lane dips toward the water again, bending past a row of warehouses whose shutters hang half open to let the breeze through. At the far end, you step into a dim interior where the air carries a curious mix of salt, wood smoke, and something sharper, a resinous green smell that makes you think of pine, though the trees here are nothing like that. Stacked along one wall are low wooden trays, each lined with fine woven mats, and on them rest pale strands coiled like sleeping snakes. A man with a reed hat stands over the trays, sprinkling the coils lightly with water from a clay jar. He explains that this is pandan leaf, not for the kitchen as you might expect, but steeped and dried in a particular way for trade. The scent is fresher than clove, softer than cinnamon, with a sweetness that hovers on the edge of grass and vanilla. The man says that bundles of pandan, woven tight, travel with rice and sugar shipments to keep insects and damp at bay. In the process, they share their smell, and buyers inland come to expect it. The fact that pandan has long been part of local cooking is unquestioned. It flavors rice, sweets, and sometimes water itself. What is less recorded, but still accepted by many here, is that prepared pandan bundles were packed as low value but essential cargo in regional trade, filling gaps between more precious loads. Old market lists mention leaf wrappings alongside spices, though whether all were pandan is less certain. In the corner, a younger worker is weaving fresh leaves into tight braids, his fingers moving without pause. He dips each strip in a shallow basin before pulling it through his grip to smooth it. The water, he tells you, is scented with a little lime to keep the color bright. Beside him, a pile of finished braids rests on a cloth, their green deeper than the harbor shallows. An odd tidbit comes from a woman sorting dried strands into smaller coils. She claims her mother would tuck a pandan braid into the family Bible to keep silverfish from chewing the pages. The smell would linger in the paper for months, and she could tell which pages had been closest to the leaf by their faint green tint. She laughs softly at the memory, holding a coil to her nose as she works. The master weaver gestures for you to follow him deeper into the warehouse. There, bundles of pandan lie stacked like corded rope, each bound with palm fiber. He explains that traders from certain islands would request them not for the leaves' own uses, but because buyers far away valued goods that smelled like home, and pandan scent traveled better than most flowers. The bundles were often given as gifts with larger purchases, a gesture that cost little and pleased much. Still, there's uncertainty. Some historians believe pandan's role in maritime trade was mostly incidental. It sent a side effect of its use as packing material. Others argue that it was a deliberate export in its own right, cultivated in coastal gardens specifically for shipment. The ledgers are unclear. They note the weight and number of leaf bundles, but seldom the species. Historians still argue whether pandan rode the trade winds as a quiet commodity or merely as company for rice, cloth, and spice. A boy appears carrying a kettle of hot water. Into it he drops a single knot of pandan, the leaves unfurling like a hand opening. The scent rises, filling the dim air until the walls seem to breathe with it. He pours you a small cup. The taste is light and green, the sweetness arriving only after you swallow. The man in the reed hat nods as you drink, as if you've passed a small test. On a shelf near the door, glass jars hold strands that have turned from green to gold with age. These, the man says, are prized by certain traders who believe the scent deepens over time. He pulls one jar down, opens it, and the smell is indeed richer, rounder, like the difference between fresh wood and cedar left in a chest for years. He offers you a finished braid to carry. The leaf feels cool in your palm, the weave smooth under your fingers. You tuck it into your sash, and already its scent is winding into the cloth. Outside, the sun catches the green, turning it bright against the fabric. You leave the warehouse with the pandan still warm from the boy's hands. As you walk, the scent stays close, gentle but insistent, the kind of smell that will make you think later in another place, another hour that the air has remembered something. The path rises from the waterfront toward a low ridge where the village keeps its small wooden shrine. The steps are shallow and worn by bare feet, their centers smooth to a soft shine. You climb without hurry, the breeze thinning as you leave the water behind. On the last step, the air changes cooler in the shade of carved eaves, and scented with something warm and faintly sweet. Earthen jars wait along the shrine's side wall, half sunk in sand to keep them steady. Their mouths are sealed with folded leaves tied down by cord. A thin thread of fragrance slips out where one leaf is loosened. Ginger, softened by time, sitting quietly inside a wine that has learned patience. A caretaker kneels on a mat and loosens a knot with careful fingers. He speaks little, but his movements are their own language. He lifts the leaf, tilts the jar, and the scent arrives fuller ginger, mellowed in spirit, citrus-laced and round, with a little tickle that rises behind the nose. He catches a measure in a shallow cup and sets it beside a small wooden figure that watches the doorway with a face both stern and kind. The offering is modest, the way most worthy things are. He pours a second cup for you. The liquid gleams like amber in the shade. When you sip, the warmth reaches the center of your tongue, travels outward, and then comes back to sit at the base of your throat. It tastes of ginger first, then of sugar that has forgotten its sharpness, then of something floral that was probably always there but needed quiet to reveal itself. You let your breath move slowly, and the warmth keeps step with it. Ginger wine, he explains, is no traveler's rumor here. In many lowland towns and upland slopes, people have long steeped sliced root in palm spirit or sugarcane liquor, sometimes sweetening the jar with palm sugar, sometimes not. That steady fact is easy to find in memories and in notebooks left by visitors who wrote more about tastes than battles. They mention the jars standing in shade, by kitchens or shrines, tapped slowly through the season for medicine, for hospitality, and for those quiet hours that ask for a companion but not a conversation. A woman arrives with a bundle of incense and bows to the wooden figure. She lights a thin stick, then sits with her back to a post, cupping her hands around a cup the caretaker has set for her. She says the wine helps her chest when the rains make the night heavy, and that her grandmother called it a blanket for the lungs. She smiles at the exaggeration, but drinks anyway, eyes half closed as the steam from the incense winds around the rim. From the far end of the veranda, an old mason adds a small story in the half-voice of someone speaking to the wood. In his apprentice days, his master would drop a shaving of dried turmeric into a jar that had grown too sweet to teach the wine a little discipline. Whether it worked by flavor or by faith, the mason cannot say. He only knows he still does it when a jar looks overly eager to please. The caretaker shrugs and says a single clove does the same in his hands. The shrine listens, accepting both schools as if they were one. No jar here is hurried. The caretaker shows you the layers inside a fresh one. Ginger sliced across the grain, thin curls of peel saved and knotted into a small pouch, a spoon of sugar put down like a kind word, then spirit poured until the slices float slightly and settle. He sets a basket lid on top for a week, then seals with leaves once the first impatience has passed. He says the jars stand for at least a month before the first careful tasting, longer if the air carries thunder. You do not press him for a rule. There is no rule that would survive this veranda. A small, odd tidbit wanders in with a schoolboy who has come to light a stick for his grandfather. He says his aunt rubs a drop of ginger wine on her wrists before a long journey, so the road will shake hands instead of jostle. He demonstrates the gesture, breathes in, and nods solemnly to the post, as if swearing it works. The caretaker does not correct him. He tops the boy's cup with river water and lets him sip the faintest echo of the jar. The boy grins as if a secret has agreed to be kept. Where the jars meet the wall, a ledger lies open, its paper seeded with small stains the color of tea. The entries are simple: dates, rain notes, kinds of root, which jar holds what. Now and then, a line of disagreement sneaks into the margin, a cousin insisting that their family's jars are older than the shrine's practice, an uncle grumbling that cane spirit bows to ginger better than palm. Historians still argue whether jars like these began as offerings that drifted into kitchens, or as kitchen comforts that wandered onto verandas and learned to sit beside incense. You trace a finger under one margin note that claims the habit came with early traders who kept their own jars near river temples, the ginger ruling both pot and prayer. Another note laughs at that spirits follow mouths. The ledger refuses to choose. A breeze lifts the fringe of the caretaker's mat and carries the wine's scent to the steps. Two fishermen pause on their way downslope. One bows, the other raises a palm without stopping. Their respect looks the same either way. The caretaker motions them over and pours each a thumb's worth. They drink standing, eyes on the figure, and return their cups with the grateful economy of men who must keep moving if they want the evening to behave. You ask, quietly, what happens to the cups placed before the figure? He says the shrine is no enemy of thrift. When the incense burns down, the offering returns to a jar marked with a piece of blue thread. That jar is for the sick and for storms. No one drinks from it to be merry. But when fever has its say, or the night speaks too loudly at the door, the blue thread jar knows what to do. He smiles, not pious, just practiced. The figure's carved mouth seems to tilt in agreement, though that may be the angle of the light. He guides you to a jar, sealed the previous season. The leaf lifts more easily, and the topmost slices hold the color of brass. He dips a small bamboo ladle and fills your cup again. This pour is deeper, less ginger shouting, more ginger humming, with a softened edge that leans toward honey without ever entering it. You drink slower than before, and somewhere between one swallow and the next, the steps beside the shrine become a little softer underfoot, as if they are wearing socks. Talk turns, as it will, to the question of beginnings. A neighbor swears her island cousins kept ginger and sugar water generations before anyone thought to share shelf space with spirits, and that the step from syrup to wine rode in on bold trade and bored sailors. Another neighbor counters that fermentation has a way of inventing itself wherever jars stand still, and that the shrine learned the taste by listening to its own walls. Historians still divide along such lines, some tying the practice to recorded exchanges with foreign ports, others pointing to scattered mentions of village brews that look very much like this but wear older names. The caretaker ties off a new seal and says nothing at all. He trusts time to collect its own votes. The sun leans toward the river, and the veranda takes that later light which turns wood into something warm enough to keep. The caretaker offers you a thin slice of candied ginger from a jar near the ledger. You bite, and the sugar gives way to a slow fire that sits under the wine's calm like coals under ash. It is not a challenge, only a conversation. Before you go, he pours a palm's worth of wine into a bottle stoppered with leaf. He sets it in your hands and says, "For the road that does not argue." The phrase fits the day like a lid fits a jar. You bow to the figure, to the jars, to the ledger with its undecided margins, and step back into a world that now smells faintly of ginger even where no jar stands. The steps receive your feet with the patience of old wood. Halfway down, you pause and feel the warmth mark its place inside you. Not a blaze, not a boast, just a steady ember that agrees to walk with you for a while. Past the shrine, the ridge flattens into a scattering of small homesteads. Beyond them, a broad field stretches toward the horizon, broken by rows of low bushes with narrow, pointed leaves. The afternoon air is drier here, the breeze full of grass scent and a faint tickle of dust. As you walk between the rows, a new smell gathers sharp, citrus-like, with a green undercurrent that makes you think of lemongrass, but cleaner, more deliberate. A woman kneeling by one bush straightens and wipes her hands. She tells you this is calamansi, grown not for the small, round fruit it's known for today, but for the dried peel that once found its way into certain spice blends shipped across the archipelago. She gestures toward a woven mat spread on the ground where peels lie in thin spirals, pale green turning toward yellow as the sun works on them. The air over the mat is bright with scent, almost drinkable. She says the dried rind was prized for the way it brightened a dish or drink without stealing the stage. In some ports, traders tucked strips of it into jars of pepper or cardamom to keep the blend lively through the damp weeks at sea. The mainstream fact she offers is simple. Calamansi, like other citrus, has grown in these islands for centuries, mentioned in colonial-era garden records and travelers' journals. Many notes mention the fresh juice for cooking and medicine, but a few also describe barrels of mixed spices where citrus peel was a quiet, fragrant passenger. Her daughter sits nearby with a knife, slicing fresh fruit into halves, the juice catching the sunlight as it runs into a clay bowl. The leftover rinds are scraped clean then laid alongside the older peels to dry. She works without hurry, her fingers sticky and bright smelling. A small boy tries to arrange the spirals into patterns, wheels, flowers, coiled snakes before the wind shifts them. A neighbor wanders over carrying a pouch. Inside are small cloth sachets filled with chopped peel. She says she sells them in the market as a way to freshen water jars or mask the smell of fish in a storage shed. She laughs and adds that her cousin swears the scent keeps rats from chewing grain sacks. Whether that is truth or stubborn belief, no one here seems eager to test it. The woman tending the bushes remembers her grandmother sending peel to a cousin in the city, who in turn traded it to a spice merchant. In her telling, the merchant would mix it into a house blend, cloves, cinnamon, pepper, and a whisper of citrus sold to sailors for shipboard cooking. Others here doubt that dried calamansi traveled far. They believe its scent was too fleeting to survive a long voyage without fading to a ghost. Historians still argue whether such blends were common practice or just an occasional flourish for certain wealthy buyers. The ledgers list citrus rind now and then, but never say which fruit wore it first. In a lean-to beside the mat, strips of older peel hang from cords, curling tighter as they lose their moisture. A jar of the finished product sits on a shelf, pale twists that smell faint but bloom back into sharpness when crushed between fingers. The woman breaks one for you. The initial scent is dry and dusty, then it bursts into a bright spark that seems to wake the air in your nose. An odd tidbit surfaces as her brother joins the group. He says his old fishing partner used to chew dried calamansi rind on long nights at sea to keep awake. The partner claimed it sharpened the eyes and kept the mouth busy without filling the stomach. No one knows if it worked beyond the simple fact that he never fell asleep at the tiller. A few of the bushes show flowers small, white, and intensely fragrant. Bees drift from bloom to bloom, ignoring the gathered humans. The woman says she'll leave these to fruit, saving their peel for her own kitchen. The rest will be picked tomorrow, peeled, and set to dry before the rain has a chance to find them. She glances at the sky, reading the slow build of clouds with the same care she gives the rose. The daughter carries the clay bowl of juice toward the house. You follow, and inside, the scent is even richer here. It mingles with ginger on the counter, fish drying by the window, and the faint char of wood ash. She offers you a small cup of the fresh juice, cut with water and a drop of honey. The flavor is sharp enough to catch your breath, then smooth enough to make you take another sip before you've thought about it. In the corner, a shallow basket holds sachets ready for market. They smell softer than the fresh peel, but still carry a whisper of the field. You press one to your nose, and the scent lingers even after you set it down. When you leave, she gives you a small bundle wrapped in palm leaf dried peel from last season, curled and pale. For your pouch, she says, so the road will taste like something. You tuck it away. As you step back into the breeze, the scent lifts from the bundle and falls into your breath, a citrus thread winding itself into the afternoon. The road bends inland toward a cluster of taller trees, their trunks pale and flaking, their branches hung with narrow leaves that whisper in the wind. Beneath them, the ground is littered with husks that look like woody lanterns, each split open to reveal pale seeds within. A man squats beside a woven tray, sifting through the husks with slow hands. He glances up and motions you closer, holding one of the seeds to your nose. The scent is soft and woody, with a faint, peppery sharpness, not as fierce as black pepper, but carrying the memory of it. He calls it litlit, a local name for a spice now mostly absent from market stalls, but once familiar to traders moving along the coast. The seeds, he explains, were sometimes used to stretch expensive pepper blends, and at other times valued in their own right for a lighter seasoning in stews and broths. Some households kept them in small jars for rubbing into fish before grilling, claiming the taste was gentler on the stomach than black pepper. The mainstream fact sits easily. These seeds come from a native tree that still grows along riverbanks in several provinces. Its bark once harvested for building, and its leaves for shade in the dry season. Records from early colonial trade mention native pepper in small shipments, often alongside true peppercorns from abroad. On a mat nearby, a boy is cracking husks with a smooth stone, working in a rhythm that sounds like patient rain. He tips the freed seeds into a basket where an older woman stirs them with her fingers. She says this keeps them from sticking together in the heat and the movement helps release their scent before they're stored. She lets you try, and soon your fingertips carry the same faint, warm sharpness. An odd tidbit comes from a fisherman sitting under a tree root. He remembers his grandfather telling of a time when these seeds were strung on thread and worn around the neck by children to keep away stomach aches. The smell, he claims, discouraged ill winds from entering the body. He chuckles at the superstition, then admits that when his own children were small, he did the same without quite believing in it. The man with the tray pours a handful of seeds into a clay bowl and crushes them with a wooden pestle. The scent blooms warmer, rounder, with a ghost of pine behind the peppery note. He says a paste of these seeds and salt was once rubbed into meat before it was laid over coals, a practice still remembered in a few inland towns. Whether this method began here or was learned from passing traders, he cannot say. Still, uncertainty lingers. Some historians suggest this native pepper was never traded far, its use confined to local cooking and small barter. Others point to ship logs listing its weight in outbound cargo, arguing it was a modest but steady export to neighboring islands. Historians still argue whether its absence in later records means it was replaced by imported pepper for taste, for prestige, or simply because supplies shifted with changing routes. From a low shelf, the man lifts a jar filled with the seeds submerged in vinegar. He says this pickle was once common in fishing villages, seeds softened until they could be mashed into dipping sauces for grilled fish. He spoons a few onto your palm. They bite with a mild heat and a sour edge, then leave a dry, fragrant echo. Behind the trees, a small shed holds drying racks for the husks. The air there is warm, heavy with the smell of resin and sun. You run your hand over a rack. The husks are brittle, the seeds rattling faintly inside. The boy brings you one to crack, and it opens with a clean snap, the seed dropping neatly into your hand. The woman at the mat begins to hum as she works, a tune as repetitive as her movements. The sound blends with the rustle of leaves overhead and the soft thud of the pestle. It's the kind of rhythm that could keep going all afternoon without tiring, each part knowing its place. Before you leave, the man measures a small pouch of seeds into your palm. He says to crush them just before cooking, never earlier, or they will sulk and lose their sharpness. You slip the pouch into your sash. As you step away, the smell follows, faint but persistent, as if the trees themselves have marked you as one of their own for the day. Toward evening, the air thins and softens, the day letting go of its grip finger by finger. You follow a footpath to the edge of the village, where the houses stand farther apart and the ground drops toward a field. There, bundles of lemongrass lie stacked like green torches beside a low wall. Someone has already tied them, with strips torn from their own leaves, the knots flat and tidy. A man kneels by a shallow pit ringed with stones. He cradles a coal in a shard of broken pot, breathes on it until the red brightens, and settles it into the pit as gently as if he were laying a child to sleep. He sets one bundle across the coals. The leaves do not catch flame. They sigh. A thin thread of smoke rises, pale at first, then deepening into a faint green-gray. The scent reaches you before the smoke does. Lemon, yes, but with a rounder, grassy base, touched by sweetness that does not come from sugar. It lifts the tightness behind your eyes, not with a push, but with a steadying hand. The smoke finds the low wind and leans toward the field, draping the tall grass, slipping between fence rails, wandering along ditches. Around the pit, other bundles wait. A woman arrives with a clay jar and sprinkles water along the stones, so the heat stays seated and does not skitter. She lays a second bundle atop the first. The sound is a quiet rustle, like robes brushing a doorway. She says they do this most evenings when the air grows busy with small wings, and also on nights when guests sit outside to talk until the moon rises. The practice feels older than the path that brought you here. In many coastal and riverside towns, lemongrass smoke has long been kept as a house answer to dusk, a mainstream habit recorded by curious visitors, noted in letters as the lemon reed burned at sundown, praised for its clean breath in courtyards and along verandas. Children gather at the edge of the smoke to test its border. They step in, step out, step in again, and then collapse into laughter when a gust folds the scent over them like a shawl. One child claims she can hear the smoke, that it makes a thin ringing if you listen with your lips. She demonstrates lips parted, the way a person might taste wind on a boat. Another child ties a strand of leaf into a tiny loop and wears it on a finger, declaring herself keeper of the smoke. None of this changes the evening. It only makes the hour feel more owned. The man stirring the coals nudges the bundle so the fresh cut ends face the ember. A low, resinous note wakes inside the lemon. You feel it in your nose more than on your tongue. He says the trick is to keep the grass smoking. Not burning patience is the heat that works. He learned to judge it by how the smoke climbs. Straight when too hot, torn when too cool, a steady ribbon when just right. He shows you with his hand, palm traveling upward through the small plume, not touching it, only reading it. A widow from the far lane arrives with 2 more bundles and a small tail. Her grandmother used to wrap a hot ember in damp lemongrass sheath and hang it by the doorway, so the smoke would fall in a soft curtain across the threshold. No guest, she says with a shrug, but all the night air we needed. It is a fringe habit you have not seen before, but it fits the place the way an odd spoon sometimes fits a shelf. Not standard, not wrong, quietly useful for someone once upon a time. Near the wall, a low table holds cups for evening tea. A boy sets a kettle beside it, tapping the lid twice with a knuckle to call attention to the steam. He drops a knotted strip of lemongrass in the water and lets it sit, the smoke and the steam braid without argument. When you lift a cup, the scent from the pit seems to settle in the surface of the tea, and the tea returns the favor by making the smoke taste cleaner. The village has learned this small duet through many evenings. No one here takes credit for the arrangement. The woman at the pit mentions a common, steady truth. Traders moving through these islands wrote often about evening smokes, leaves, husks, and grasses, and remarked with particular fondness on the lemon reed, for both its smell and its effect. Such notes appear in ship journals and house inventories alike. They turn up in side comments next to lists of salt, vinegar, and oil. You can picture a ledger line reading simply, "Grass for dusk." The phrase feels right in your mouth. Still, the talk, as always, has its disputed corners. A neighbor says their grandparents burned lemongrass mainly for guests, more ceremony than remedy. The smoke meant to mark kindness rather than chase insects. Another insists the practice began as a fisherman's trick on riverbanks, and only later wandered into courtyards as manners caught up with usefulness. Historians still argue whether lemongrass smoke spread inward from river and coast as a practical shield, or whether it rode in the other direction from feast to field as a scented habit that only later learned to work. The smoke keeps its counsel, draping a tamarind's lower branches without choosing sides. Someone brings out a low brazier of coals so the smoke can be set under a bench. A handful of dried citrus peel is added, a whisper of brightness stepping into the lemon. Another handful is tossed into the big pit, shavings of cinnamon saved from the kiln's trimming. The air rounds out, the sharp edges sanded down to warmth. It is not a recipe. It is the kind of layering hands learn when hands belong to a place for a long time. A small, odd tidbit wanders in with the wind. An uncle swears that on nights when the moon cuts thin, a twist of pandan braided into the lemongrass keeps dreams from lingering in the room after a restless sleeper rises. He says the smell knows how to open a door the dream forgot. No one argues. Someone laughs once, softly, as if not to wake the house behind them. You notice how the smoke teaches the hour to move. Insects falter and choose other lanes above the ditch. A dog curls closer to the warm stones, ears easing. Farther out, where the smoke thins, fireflies test the border and decide it is not a wall. The stacked bundles settle as their leaves dry, making a sound like shallow water on small stones. You watch the ash at the coal's edge go from black to sugar gray. The man lifts a spent bundle, shakes it lightly so the last heat lets go, and lays a fresh one across the ember. The exchange is smooth, the kind of practiced handoff that would look plain if you did not know what it took to learn. He invites you to place the next bundle yourself. You lay it down clumsily, then nudge the stalks until the smoke tightens into that proper ribbon. He nods once, a craftsman's gentlest approval. The smoke honors your attempt by not making a fuss. Beyond the wall, the field's color deepens into evening. Birds drag the tail ends of their roots across the sky. Someone hums half a hymn and forgets the rest. The tune does not mind. The cups on the table empty in quiet order and are rinsed with a dipper. The kettle clicks as it cools. A child, sleepy now, leans against her mother's hip and draws a finger through a little soot on the stone, leaving a dark crescent that looks like a boat. You think about how a day can be taught to end. A pot, a coal, a bundle of grass tied with its own leaf, nothing more. The smoke takes the heat's language and translates it into something the hour understands. When you stand, the scent has settled in your hair and in the cloth at your shoulders. It will walk home with you and sleep in your pillow, speaking quietly until morning. Before you go, the woman presses a knot of dried lemongrass into your palm. For later, she says, when the night forgets to be gentle, you feel its light roughness, its promise to become smoke and leave nothing heavy behind. You tuck it into your sash. The pit breathes once, twice. The breeze answers without words. Evening finishes lowering itself over the village like a woven screen pulled down to keep out moths. Night drifts in without asking permission. It gathers first in the rafters, where the last light tangles with spider silk, then settles along the floorboards and the corners of baskets. You spread a woven mat near the doorway where the air still remembers the river. The room smells of the day's errands, a braid of grass and smoke, a whisper of clove from the pocket of your sash, a leaf's green breath that has chosen your pillow for its last errand before sleep. You sit, then fold yourself down, letting the mat answer your bones with its patient weave. Somewhere beyond the houses, a dog lifts its head to remark upon the moon and then thinks better of it. From the lane comes the late clatter of a pot set upside down to dry. The sounds are small and spaced. They do not add up to a story, only to the hour's willingness to be gentle. You draw the mat corner over your shoulder and feel the day loosen, as if a knot behind your ribs has remembered how to be string. Close by, you have laid the things you meant to forget. The knot of dried lemongrass, the 2 cardamom pods the alley woman pressed into your palm, the elder's star anise folded in paper trimmed from cloth. They keep their shapes in the dark, but it is their breath you notice, the way each waits its turn to step forward and then steps back. Tonight, Clove holds the first watch, its sweetness sharp enough to tidy the air. After that, a cooler hand may settle across your face, and you will think of the pouch that rides in a sash on long roads. Something green will arrive next, perhaps pandan from the river, perhaps the memory of a knot warmed by a pocket, perhaps only the day recalling itself one last time. You turn onto your side, and the mat releases a little of its day-long heat. Your cheek finds the smooth part, the place worn by many heads, the cloth thinned to the softness of an old story. The room makes a few last arrangements. The door leans against its wooden stop with a satisfied click. The night insects agree on a steady hum. A breeze explores the corners and then lies down. You can almost count the spices by the way your breath changes. A small brightness at the bridge of the nose, a pleasant weight behind the tongue, a sour remembered as light rather than as edge, a low warmth that keeps your shoulders from listening too hard. If any of them speak, it is to say only enough. If the mind tries to keep tally, cloves weighed in pans, cinnamon drying like curled smiles, ginger giving up its heat to jars that do not hurry, you let the pictures fade to outlines. The ledger of the day can close itself. Wherever the first seeds traveled from, whichever groves were older, however the old arguments would like to end, the room is not interested. It has its own archive. Faint marks on your fingers, a thumbprint of yellow at your wrist, a line of scent sewn into your sleeve. That is record enough. You take one slow breath for the harbors, one for the gardens, one for the lanes where wide hats hid quiet work. The next breath belongs to nothing at all. The mat's weave becomes the edge of a shore. Sleep comes the way. Trade once came on a tide that knew its business, and your last waking sense is of a clove's crown resting somewhere near your heart, no heavier than a thought. The night has learned your weight and has decided it is light. The mat holds you without asking you to be any particular shape. Around you, the room organizes the dark into gentle pieces. A square for the doorway, long shadows for the rafters, a thin ribbon for the crack where the moon persuades the wall to let a little silver through. You do not need any of it, but the room keeps offering. The air is soft with things that have volunteered to be background. A shy sweetness that used to be clove, A distant grass memory that might be lemongrass or might be the field imagining itself again. A thread like cool stone underwater. Perhaps cardamom. Perhaps only breath behaving. If the scents were voices, they would be the kind that practice silence and speak only to prevent confusion. They do not call you back. They make room. The body obeys simple instructions now. Sink, warm, forget. The day loosens further and tucks itself into small pockets. The nod of a vendor, the careful lift of a jar, the patient flip of a drying slice, the quiet courage of a coal coaxed toward evening. Each image is a shallow bowl. They stack neatly, then the shelf is covered, then the cupboard is closed. Beyond the wall, the tide does its long arithmetic in the dark. Somewhere a rope creaks and rests. Somewhere a heron draws a straight line nobody else can see. The world insists there is no hurry, and you agree. If dawn wants you, it will find you by the slow arch of your breathing and by the way your hand has wandered toward the ledge where the little paper packet waits without ambition. Sleep carries you past that ledge. The packet can be opened tomorrow. Tonight it is enough that the air is tidy, the mat is patient, and the dark holds still. End of script. Sweet dreams.